What's up, everybody? I'm Noah Krachivik. With me, as always, is Carlos Garrido. Welcome to another Professor in the Carpenter, put on by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. Tonight, we got a lot of show for you guys. We're going to be going over Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Omali Yeshitela. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from the Uhuru movement. We're going to go over the terrorist attack on Moscow. We're going to finish up our conversation on the Communist Manifesto that we began the other day, and get into mostly Section 2 and a couple other very important parts that I think people sort of skip over or gloss over a lot of the time and don't really put into practice when they're thinking about the real world. And we're going to do all of that. But first, please rise for the International.
All right, welcome, folks. I want to remind you all before we start that we have been demonetized by YouTube and Google AdSense. Last month, they took all the money that you all had donated to us, so $900+ in the first 12, 13 days of the month. And it was a huge hit to the revenue of the Institute. Without your financial support, we wouldn't be able to do a fraction of what we do. So to combat this, we have been pinning our PayPal donation link to the top of the live stream on YouTube, and if you're watching us on Twitter or X, to the comment section of the live broadcast. So just wanted to get that out there before we start. But before we get into anything, Noah, how are you doing, brother?
I'm good. It's been a long 24 hours with anyone who has family in Moscow, especially near the Crocus concert hall. So Cobra, our heart goes out to your mother-in-law, brother. I saw your post. So and the families of all the victims and everyone there. I spoke with RT late last night. It was 4 a.m. in Moscow when I was talking to them. It's really, really horrible. You know, I think that's what everybody's been talking about. But other than that, I'm doing all right. You know, it's the weekend, getting a lot of research and studying done. How about you, brother? How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Received a few really good news this week that has had the spirits high. A lot of big events going on in world politics, some of them favorable to progressive causes, some of them not so favorable, some of them just straight up tragedies like what happened in Russia, the terrorist attack, which is not the first one that Russia has had to endure since the commencement of the special military operation. I'm reminded, of course, of the brutal murder of Daria Dugina, the daughter of philosopher Alexander Dugin, who I, of course, have a million different disagreements with him as a Marxist-Leninist philosopher. But there's a long tradition of killing philosophers, and it's usually the gadflies of the powerful who are killed. It's not the mouthpiece of the elite who are killed. It's usually the gadflies. In ancient Athens, it was, of course, Socrates who was killed. And not that I'm making comparisons here, but in Argentina, at one point during the dictatorship, there was a lot of professors that were killed. The late Enrique Dussel was coming home from school one day and he had his house bombed. And there's been many other cases when the thinkers that are the gadflies, as Socrates called himself, of the state are murdered. And, so it's not the first time that a terrorist, disgusting attack is waged against Russia since the commencement of the SMO.
Yeah. And I mean, even here in the US, right? They murdered Fred Hampton. They murdered Martin Luther King. They arrest Henry Winston and Gus Hall and thousands of communists, not for breaking any laws, right? For the crime of fighting for freedom and for thinking for themselves, not thinking what the elites wanted them to be thinking. And so, yeah, it's a sort of a dark time in Moscow right now. Honestly, if you want to get into that first, we can. But just in general, I think we're beginning to approach a point in the US where we may have to seriously begin considering the state taking actions like that again. As the legitimacy of the state continues to crumble in the eyes of the people. I mean, ask anybody if they support the US government, they're mostly going to tell you no, especially in the working class, right? But as this continues, as we get more powerful, as these new movements, this new movement really that I think the Midwestern Marx Institute is a very big part of, as it concretize into what will be the future, right? What we will become, that's going to have to be something we consider. And if they can't silence you in one way, they will do so in another. Censorship is only, the first move.
Absolutely. One of the things that we want to kick off the conversation today by looking at is the interview that Tucker Carlson did with Omali Yeshitela of the Uhuru movement and the African People's Socialist Party, who have been being targeted by what some call the deep state, the national security forces, who have labeled him an agent and his peers agents of Russia, simply because they dared to question the narrative of US NATO imperialism, a narrative that has led to the death of more than 1 million people, a senseless death, and that has utilized and propped up neo-Nazis in order to achieve those horrendous ends. So all solidarity with the Uhuru movement, with Omali and the others being targeted by the national security state, the FBI. There's, of course, certain theoretical disagreements that we have as Marxist-Leninists with their organization, but that does not matter, even in the slightest bit. When one of us is attacked by the state, as Marxists, we have a duty to stand with the person being attacked by the elite. And it's very telling that a whole lot of people on the US left, a whole lot of people in the liberal media, a whole lot of libertarians that go around crying about free speech all the time, have been completely mute about the case of Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru movement. And one of the central figures within the mainstream media, I guess no longer within the mainstream media, who hasn't ignored the case of Omali Yeshitela or of Assange and other people who have been silenced by the state, has been Tucker Carlson. A figure that we've been exploring for a while, pregnant with contradictions in many ways, in some areas standing against the forces of empire, in other areas boosting voices that are, as within the imperial narrative as you can probably get, as She Van Fleet and other complete whack jobs, doing so-called scholarship that's utterly baseless and just politically aimed at attacking the communists, just old school McCarthyite anti-communist propaganda. So this contradictory figure of Tucker Carlson has recently done something stupendous, allowing hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, to hear what's going on to an African nationalist, socialist, communist organization. And I think pretty special, and we'll get to this as we watch the video, is the comment reactions from the people, usually people on the conservative wing of the spectrum that follow Tucker Carlson, who perhaps their parents and their grandparents' generation were the most fearsome anti-communist, but who now find themselves. I mean, some of these comments are stupendous. You know, I'm not a lover of socialism. I hate socialism, but I hate our government more. I hate our elite more. What this man is saying is true. So a whole plethora of comments like that with people sympathizing with a black communist. So that's I think is a tremendous positive feat, just as Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin was, and we'll get to that shortly. Let me pull that up. But no,
Yeah.
any comments before?
Yeah, I just want to. I want to really emphasize that we don't agree with the Uhuru movement on everything, right? We don't need to, and I think the time for people allowing these sort of non-political questions of, you know, what is the way you want to think, the words you want to use to describe X, or the words you want to use to describe Y. What's the relation between X and Y, right? Allowing a difference of opinion on what that is and what that constitutes to create an unbridgeable gap between different parts of the progressive forces is no longer tenable or viable or even should be tolerated, right? We're in a period of rapid decline, or of rapidly approaching revolutionary conditions. And if we don't get our act together, and sorry to use the same word again, but act on these conditions, we're going to fall behind and get nothing done and sit here sort of bickering again with each other for all time while the people pass us by. And I don't want that. I want to fight. That's what I want to do. I want to fight.
Yeah, and we have to realize that in the time of turmoil that we're in, where the objective conditions of the American people are getting worse, where they're more indebted than ever, where they find it harder to obtain the necessaries of life to survive, where anywhere from 60 to 70% of Americans are a last paycheck away from homelessness. The vast majority of Americans are in various forms of debt, debts for trying to have a home, that's for getting sick and seeking medical treatment, that's for daring to get an education, that's for having to put their kid in daycare or in some form of care so that the parent can go to work. You know, so they're obtaining debts not on the basis of speculating on properties or anything. They're obtaining debts precisely because they're seeking out the things that are necessary in order to have some basic form of human existence. The things that, according to the UN Charter on Economic, Social Rights, ought to be guaranteed to everyone universally, but are not, of course, in this rapidly deteriorating country that we're in. So amidst all those conditions, there's a wide variety of different forms of dissent that the people are expressing, some of which are more coherent in our view. Of course, it is a form of dissent that operates with a Marxist-Leninist framework that is most capable of understanding the situation and moving us forward. But there's a wide variety of other different forms that this is taking, different ways of understanding the crisis, its roots, and how we move forward. And any form of dissent, I think it's a positive force that we ought to be operative in, and hoping to do our best to steer towards the right direction, which, as we'll discuss later in the stream, is the central purpose of communists from the the pen of Marx and Engels in the second chapter, the first thing that they mention is we are not a force outside of the working class, we are a force within the working class. And whatever the working class is active, dissenting, doing anything, we're the ones that are there and are helping them keep in mind the interests of the working class as a whole and the ultimate long-term interests of themselves as working people.
Yeah, any dissent, view it as an opportunity to create something, right? To create solidarity, to create this force that is needed to overcome the sorry state of our conditions. As Carlos was just saying, people are in debt. People can't afford to miss a single paycheck. Over 90% of Americans have a zero or less than zero net worth. And we are going over this when we went over the first part of the manifesto, right? That people get told communists want to abolish their right to private property. But over 90% of Americans have a zero or less than zero net worth. That means that ability to get property is already abolished. Capitalism did that. What we want to do is expand that property so that we can all own it, so that even having a home isn't ransomed to you. You don't have to make some parasite rich just to live in your house. You can live in your house and own your house yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you really think about the meat and potatoes of what keeps this wretched system going, it's a form of coercion. The term that was popular in the 19th century, even here in the US, was calling what most Americans have to do to survive wage slavery. The thinking, even within the Republican Party and figures like Abraham Lincoln and others that were part of the anti slavery movement, they were conscious of the fact that even after chattel slavery was abolished, that now the question at hand is wage slavery. And this term of wage slavery doesn't even come from Marxism. It precedes it and was operative in many radical socialist thinkers pre-Marx in the American context. So what produces this system of wretchedness, what's at its foundation, is this form of wage slavery that we're all forced to do, and that the theorists, the ideologues, the mouthpieces of the people that are in power and benefit from the system, they phrase this arrangement as some form of consent, some consentful action. I willingly and freely and autonomously sell my labor power to a capitalist, and I'm not being exploited if I'm selling it freely. And some even say, well, even if you are being exploited, you're selling it freely, so it's not something unjust or that that even matters. It's irrelevant because you're doing it freely. But that's as free as getting someone against the wall with a knife and telling them follow Midwestern Marx. You know, can you really say that they came to follow Midwestern Marx freely when the alternative was death? Capitalism, unlike any other system in the past, operates with a form of mute compulsion. It's a phrase from Marx's Capital, a form of economic power that's not directly visible in terms of violence and bayonets and stuff like that. But you know that coming from a working class family, if you don't work, if you don't sell your labor power to a capitalist on the market to make them rich and at least survive, you don't survive. And if you don't survive, you're obviously dying. So it's an alternative between death and getting exploited and making someone else rich. And that's no alternative at all, really. That's a system of slavery. It's a system that's deeply unfree. And I think more and more Americans are coming to realize that.
Yeah, ain't it convenient that the class that owns everything already and says, if you want anything, you got to do something for us. You got to pay us for it. You got to make us rich, and we'll give you a little bit of this. Isn't it convenient that they're the ones telling us that this is freedom, right? That, well, technically you're under a contract to do this, right? Little convenient for my sake. I'd say if they want to own things, they should get a job like the rest of us and stop leeching off of us for everything, right? we get born into this world, right? This system where everything is owned already. We can't just go off into the woods and, like catch a fish with our bare hand and right? And then like live under a tree branch or something. That's ridiculous. If we want a house, we must make elites rich. If we want the money to buy food for our children, to put clothes on their backs, we must make the elites rich. That's the way it's set up. And then they tell you when you have a problem with that, oh, you're just lazy. Not the ones who've never worked a single day in their goddamn lives. How is that? What kind of topsy-turvy logic is that? We're the ones who sit on their asses getting rich from us get to call us lazy when we call them on it. I don't know.
Absolutely. By the way, Reclaim Dasein, we are going to be covering at some point the third chapter on the various forms of non-scientific socialism. Here's Professor Jesus, I can't speak today. Professor Danny Shaw, thank you so much for coming on, brother. How you doing?
Peace, everybody. How you doing? Thanks for having me on. I'll follow y'all's lead. Did you start the Omali Yeshitela yet?
No, we're just getting into it. For those that haven't seen it, Tucker Carlson has just interviewed last night Omali Yeshitela, the leader of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, a black socialist nationalist communist group. We of course have, as Marxist-Leninists, some disagreements with it, but that's completely irrelevant. When someone is attacked by the deep state for telling the truth on questions of war and peace, we should stand on their side, no ifs, ands, or buts. And we've seen nothing but crickets from the liberal media. We've seen nothing but crickets from the so-called leftist media, from organizations that claimed to be in favor of Black lives and the Black freedom struggle. We've seen nothing but crickets from, of course, the regular mainstream liberal media, not just the leftists and the DSAers, but this is something that we've been covering as it's been unfolding. And one of the people that, for some reason or other, has also covered it has been Tucker Carlson. One of the last segments he did on Fox News before he got kicked out for being a thorn on imperialist narrative in some areas, specifically Russia. He willingly goes along with the narrative on China, but at least Russia he's okay in some other areas as well. One of the last segments he did was on the recent attacks on the Uhuru movement, and now he just had Omali Yeshitela on to describe the horrendous process of censorship and attacks, and not just from the state, but from the big banks that have prevented the Uhuru movement from continuing the pretty awesome practices that they have been doing. And so let's get into the interview, and let's also have an eye out, I think, for some of the comments, because I think that tells you where the mood of the people are, because the comments at the top are generally the ones that are the most liked. So they express some form of sentiment of the zeitgeist of the people watching this video. So I think it's favorable. If we analyze those, it's favorable for us communists. But let's give this a watch.
That Russia. So it was about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, that Russian troops moved into eastern Ukraine. And throughout the West, Western media reported this as a totally unprovoked act of aggression. Who could have seen it coming? But there was, if you paid very close attention, one political group in the United States that had a different explanation for it. And it was a group a lot of people would dismiss as fringe, a group called the African People's Socialist Party. And to be honest, we'd never heard of them. But around this time, they started releasing videos with a different view. Those videos were critical of the United States and NATO. And they pointed out that there was, in fact, a history here, and that NATO had been expanding eastward for quite some time and putting a lot of pressure on Russia. Now, you may agree or disagree with that, but they had a coherent view of it. And to give you an example of what that view was, here's video from the group's chairman, a man called Omali Yeshitela. Watch.
There's a discussion about Russian military border buildup on its border with Ukraine, and how this represents a terrible threat to Ukraine by Russians. But there is no acknowledgement of the history that took us to this place, how the U.S. overthrew, participated in facilitating the overthrow of a government in Ukraine that was friendly to the Soviet Union. Nor does it talk about the history of this relationship between Ukraine and Russia. And you have to remember that they're using NATO here too. And NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was something that came into existence to deal with the Soviet Union, or Soviet Russia as it used to be called. And so this is an ongoing aggression. It did not just start. It's been going on for a while, but the U.S. government relies on the ignorance of the people in this country and much of the world that's facilitated by people like Zuckerberg.
So you can agree or disagree with that analysis. A couple parts that are indisputably true. One, the U.S. government does rely on the ignorance of its population to do things in that population's name that the population doesn't want. Start all kinds of pointless wars, for example, get people killed, bankrupt the government. That's all real. It's also true that there is a history in Ukraine, and you may or may not think it justifies Russian aggression, but there's no question that NATO has been moving eastward, and it's hard to see why, what benefit there is to the NATO member states. In any case, that's a point of view, agree with it or not. But for some reason, the FBI was watching. They were watching, and they considered sentiments like that not just wrong or offensive, but a crime. And so 3 months later, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, our federal law enforcement tasked with keeping us safe, spent its time, and a lot of agents, it looked to be dozens of agents, raiding the home and the office of the man you just saw speaking, as well as the homes of 6 other members of his organization. Dozens of heavily armed agents descended with automatic weapons. They used flashbang grenades and drones. The first thing they did when they broke in, when they smashed the door, was to tape over the internal security cameras so there would be no record of what they were doing. Then they walked off with a huge amount of material. They stole things from Yeshitela and his wife and a bunch of other people who work for this organization. Then they handcuffed them and led them away. This is how they described the experience at the time.
They handcuffed me and my wife out here. They wanted me to sit on the curb while they were carrying this out. Something that I refused to do. They wanted my wife to sit on the curb out here that she refused to do.
As I was coming out, this big old drone met me.
The only revolutionary organization that's done something here.
I just wanted to say something real quick. For some reason, I can't hear you, so I've been having to hear it through the phone, and it's a little bit backed up. But what's interesting here, I think there's 2 things. One is that Yeshitela starts his message from the clip that Tucker used by talking about history. This is something, of course, that bourgeois analysts are anathema to. They're forced to create a science fiction sort of history in order to talk about events, to invent a reality that's not at all in line with how the world actually is, in order to provide some form of baseless justification for the narrative that the ruling elite is spinning to describe the ongoing events around the world. But Omali Yeshitela explained something that I think Tucker Carlson admits that he agrees with, the fact that there is a history behind the activities that took place that commenced the special military operations, a history of NATO expansion eastward, a history of U.S. involvement in overthrowing the government of Ukraine, most specifically in 2014. There's a broad, long history that is indispensable, that functions as the factors that create the condition for the fact that the U.S. media is hyper-focused on, which is, of course, the commencement of the special military operation. For these people, history doesn't exist. For these people, the events that led to the special military operations start in February 2022. For them, the events that led to October 7th and the breaking out of the prison of Gaza, the largest open-air prison in the world, start on October 7th. There's no notion of history, and I think what Yeshitela is bringing to the table here is precisely that. The other quick thing that I wanted to point at is that these activities that they've waged against the Uhuru movement are not new. You know, there's a very long, detailed history of how the deep state, if we want to use that term, has attacked similar-minded groups, has attacked the Communist Party, the Black Panthers, and many other groups that have stood against war, against imperialism, against capital, against the dictatorship, the tyranny of capital that we live under.
Here on the ground, practically for African people, is the one that's come under attack. Institution that offers a community radio station, a newspaper, a commercial kitchen, an Aquaba Hall rental space, and community office for our organizers. That was the building that has come under attack.
So if you're watching this video right now, the chances are that you're probably not a revolutionary Black nationalist. We're not, obviously. But you may be an American. And if you are an American, or if you believe in the idea of America, you should care about this case. Why? Because of the charges. Now, typically in situations like this, when the city of Philadelphia, for example, incinerated the entire MOVE community back in the 80s, when the US government under Bill Clinton killed all the Branch Davidians and their children at Waco, when federal agents murdered Randy Weaver's wife and child and shot his dog, there's some pretext for doing it. There's a gun charge. They were caught with bomb-making materials. There's some weird sex stuff going on. They're child pornographers. It's human trafficking. They at least bother to tell you a story that makes you stop asking more questions because you think to yourself, well, these people were obviously very bad. They did something that was a legit felony, and they probably got what was coming to them. What's so interesting about this case is that the government under Joe Biden is not even pretending that they did anything illegal. There's no actual crime here. No one has been charged with bomb making or hurting anyone or any act of violence, no act of embezzlement or theft. What they're charged with is liking Russia, is having opinions that the Biden administration doesn't want them to have, saying things that they're not supposed to say in public. So even if you're not a revolutionary black nationalist, you should care deeply about this case, because first they come for people like this, people on the fringe, and then they come for you. The details of the story are even more shocking than we're describing, and we're going to get them from the man at the very center of it, Omali Yeshitela, the chairman of this group, the man now accused of being a Russian agent and about to go on trial. We're honored to have him join us now. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. This is an important interview for us. It helps us to break out of this encirclement, information encirclement that has been imposed on us by the U.S. government. And when we talk about the ignorance of the people being a factor here, part of the way to keep the people ignorant is to keep them from participating in discussion.
Yes.
Because the attack on my right to speak is also an attack on the right of the people to hear. So I have something to say. People may, as you said, agree or not agree with it, but at least they can have opinions that are informed opinions about agreeing or not agreeing with me. But when they use grenades and battering rams and armored vehicles and assault weapons and things like that to keep me from talking, and when they talk about putting me in prison for 15 years, which is the equivalent of a life sentence for me, this is designed to keep people from hearing what I have to say. And it's a real testimony, in my opinion, of the fragility of a social system that cannot tolerate a discussion coming from somebody who, from one of the most economically depressed sector of the city of St. Louis. So it's all a falsification. I wanted to say, first of all, that our lawyers, for the purpose of making this defense, had to move forward and say that even if we did what they said we did, that the First Amendment protects us. But I want to say beyond that, that they fabricated most of what they say, that they're lying. It's mostly a fabrication, and that they're politically motivated in doing what they have done because of internal crisis and crisis in the existing global system that sees forces like China and Russia, and increasingly even countries like Iran, countries like Venezuela are challenging the hegemony of a country that has held that for the longest period of time, has been the big hegemon. And so I think this is a domestic crisis that's represented by what we see happening inside this country right now, and what we see being partially responsible for it by forces around the world who are challenging the ability of the United States to continue to be the big dog here. I think that's what we're looking at. And then, of course, there's the immediate personal interests of a guy who's running for president, re-election, and who is also attempting to escape the moniker of being sleepy. So, I mean, I think these are some of the factors that informs much of what's happening right now.
Yo,
One of the great...
Yo, he's so eloquent. He said a president, whose moniker indicates he has a hard time not falling asleep. Yeah, Omali Yeshitela, a true OG. He's been doing it for a long time. It would be amazing. I don't know if we can play it off of YouTube. I don't want us to get in trouble on the stream. But Carlos, do you remember on that Dead Prez album, Get Free in 2000, it opens with Chairman Omali Yeshitela. If we could play that somehow, I think our comrades would love it. But there's no question. I mean, I agree with what different comrades are saying in the chat. It's crazy how Tucker Carlson has his own ideology. We would certainly disagree with him on the bulk of social issues, particularly his anti-immigrant stance, his xenophobia, which promotes violence against oppressed people from other countries forced to leave their homeland. We would agree with my colleague Manny Ness that migration is the inevitable product of imperialism. But I mean, Tucker is giving liberal hegemony all types of issues. He's a true monkey wrench in the smooth grinding of their liberal gears. And I think it's almost become one of our slogans, or one of our ideological formulations that we can keep coming back to, that liberalism is hegemony, to quote Kyle, because those three words say it all. And for Tucker to go from, Putin a month ago and now Omali Yeshitela, he's doing something unique. He is making a true statement about the First Amendment. Now, if he's truly for freedom of speech, he needs to have on low key. He needs to have on the Palestinian comrades, the Palestinian youth movement, or within our lifetime, whatever, Palestinian speakers as well. But I don't think he'll do a lot of those because that would expose other contradictions that he has.
I think it's interesting the turn Tucker's taken after getting fired from Fox. I don't think he would have allowed this interview to go the way it did while he was still at Fox. And I think that says something about, like, he is who he is. He's Tucker Carlson, but he believes in what he's saying about free speech. And I think that's important, and we should try to take advantage of it. I would say even more, I want to see, Carlos Garrido on there. I want to see real communist voices just over and over again. If he's going to give us an opportunity to put forward a Marxist view, I think that we should be taking advantage of that. I don't know. It's a strange time, and we have strange bedfellows. As like you said, quoting Kyle, liberalism is the hegemony, right?
I can add to, as I've said before, like so many of us, Noah talks about it as well. We proletarians have to work for rich people because, our class brethren and sisters aren't paying our bills. So a lot of us in all types of different forms have to work for rich people. And I've been in so many mansions and palaces and castles, and that's not hyperbole, where Tucker Carlson has been on over the years. I mean, he how many T-shirts I've seen over the years in the homes of rich folks? Tucker for president, and this man is extremely popular. And it was so telling when after the Putin conversation, these liberals, and I'm casting a wide net here, all the liberals I knew refused to watch it, made fun of it, just said that Tucker Carlson was authoritarian, this and that, because they couldn't sit with it, and to think, again, liberalism as hegemony, that so many of our liberal family members, they think themselves to be one way, but they're the ones behind this horrific proxy war to the tune of $300 billion of our tax dollars against Russia. We see you all just discussed the horrific terrorist incident in Russia, 24 hours ago. So I'm just thinking of and never mind my working class coworkers and colleagues who freaking love Tucker and love Trump. And if they're watching this stuff, there has to be some impact, because Omali Yeshitela is extremely eloquent. I mean, we heard Putin dropping sociological and history and psychological lessons on him. So it's just so good to see all of these contradictions coming to the fore.
No, absolutely. And you make a very astute observation, rephrasing or bringing back Kyle's quote that liberalism is hegemony. I think we have to ask ourselves something. It might appear as a simple analysis, but it's one that I think says something, which is, who is being attacked by the powers that be? To phrase it in other terms, who's being attacked by the man, as used to be phrased in the Black Freedom Movement? Who's being attacked by the deep state, as contemporary, specifically more conservative folks say? Who's being attacked by the central, most important apparatuses of the capitalist imperialist state? And I hate to break it, but there's a whole lot of progressives that aren't. There's a whole lot of people that are good on issues of debt, of Medicare for all. I mean, I think like Medicare for all is something that people need. That's like a half step towards a nationalized health system, which is what we really need. But no one gets censored or attacked for critiquing the healthcare system and urging for Medicare for all. No one gets censored or attacked for doing the same thing with student debt, No one gets censored or attacked for doing the same thing with minimum wage. Important though these issues are, especially as bread and butter issues for regular working class people, what gets people censored and attacked? It's issues of empire. It's issues of war and peace. What got Assange in the tank was his exposing of the crimes of the American imperialist state. What gets everyone censored, look back at all of the key people that have been censored. They're censored because they challenge the narratives of empire. And Tucker might be horrible on some national questions. He might be okay on some, worse on others. What matters is that there's a whole lot of people that are really good on national questions. When it comes to the working class movement, the union movement, Bernie's still okay. Some of the squad, quote unquote, progressives are still okay. They sound a whole lot better than Tucker in those areas. But when it comes to issues of war and peace, none of them are getting censored. None of them are getting targeted by the powers that be. Nowhere near how Tucker is for simply allowing as an interviewer, that's not even him preaching, allowing as an interviewer voices like Omali to reach American ears, or voices like Putin's to reach American ears. And for a period of time when he was in Fox, voices like Christian Smalls and what's his other cat's name?
Max
Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal, Jimmy Dore, and Cornel West, and a whole bunch of other people who went on and challenged some of the narratives of empire.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason for that, right? What type of movements become dangerous? Anti-war movements, right? When the Bolsheviks win in the October Revolution, what gets them the support of the majority of the masses in Russia? It's the breakup of the SRs, the Socialist Revolutionaries, right? After they split, the Bolsheviks are the only anti-war party. Their slogan, peace, land, and bread, begins with the word peace, because anti-war movements, right, can turn into something else because the people aren't here for it. Even when you can't really cognize it and like put it into an eloquent, phraseology or speech, you generally understand that these wars are not being fought for your interests in mind. They're not being fought for freedom or democracy. They're being fought for money. It's always about accumulation, always. And so people don't want our sons and daughters, our brothers and sisters dying, so the financial cartel can add more zeros to accounts, right? And so I think it's important to understand that.
Just a reminder to all our people, we're at 640 people watching right now. Anti-imperialist salute to all the comrades on Twitter, on Discord, on YouTube, wherever you're watching from. Please boost the stream. We live in McCarthyism 2.0. Did the Cold War ever end? Ask the Cuban people. Ask the Venezuelan people. Ask the Yemeni people. Ask the Chinese people. Ask the Russian people. So how do we overcome this fascism, this censorship? They talk so much about the First Amendment, but why are they so afraid of the truth? And yeah, we have to recognize that Tucker Carlson has played a unique role opening up this type of space, and we have to, of course, confront him on all of his xenophobia and racism, and there is a ton of it. But we also have to take advantage of these strange bedfellows, as they say.
And beautiful things of this moment that we're living in is that we can sort of put aside some of our preconceptions. And I'm sure there's a lot we disagree on. I don't think I disagree with a single word that you just said. I thought it was very nicely put and wise. And I just want to say for the record, I agree with you. This is a sign of fragility of the regime. Confident rulers don't act like this. But so I had to say that. But I just want to get to the facts of it quickly. So am I misreading this? I think your lawyer is right. Even if you are guilty of what they accuse you of doing, you're not guilty of any crime because you're not accused of violence, theft, no conventional crime. You're accused of having the wrong opinions. Am I missing something?
Well, yeah, because what they've said is that even if what we said was true, even it's disinformation. We're accused of spewing Russian disinformation. And they have said that even if we said what we said is true, it still amounts to disinformation. So they're not necessarily accusing us of lying.
Can you pause
They're
that real
accusing us
quick?
of talking. So, I mean,
Listen to what he just said. Even if what they just said was true, it would still be considered Russian disinformation. Who controls what is true and what's not? Right? This should be an objective thing outside of human subjectivity. But our ruling class is telling us straight up, we decide what's true. If you point out that what we're saying is true is not the truth, then we will arrest you. We will take what you own and we will put you in prison. That's what's happening right here. Go on. I'm sorry to interrupt it.
And the people are just completely outraged. If I can, just for a second, share the comments real quick, and then go back to the video. So this is from Janet Whitney. This is just what they did to Trump. So this is why it's important that when we see the deep state coming after Trump in any way, we can't just sit back, as many leftists do, and say, hooray, they're coming after the fascists. We have to use that to explain why it is that the state does that and bring people from that camp over. Because they're not saying, if you look at these comments, ew, it's a dirty black communist, I don't want to align with him. No, they're saying, oh, this reminds me of what they did to the person that I've been following, to the person that got me to think about politics in a way that creates a space for dissenting to the way that things are. This is just what they did to Trump. The government has no right to stop anyone from saying anything. That's another comment. Don't tell me the whole FBI doesn't need to be abolished. The people who carried out this raid were just as guilty as the people who ordered it. I mean, who has been historically in favor of abolishing these institutions that are the arms that do the dirty work of imperialism abroad, and for the case of the FBI, of the capitalist state at home? These are extremely radical demands, and when part of the conservatives, even if some of the leaders do it disingenuously, it doesn't matter. What matters is that a group of people, a significant part of the country, is coming in line with a position that has historically been the position of communists. I hate socialists, but I fucking despise our government. This is a sentiment that could not have been uttered during the McCarthyite era. The end of it was, I hate socialists and I support my government. Why? Because super patriotism was operative 24/7, especially in this part of the population. It was my country is always right, even when it's wrong. And this would have been one of the cases where I hate socialists, and yeah, I might have a little feeling about this, but my country is always right, even when it's wrong. And that's not there anymore. Even this sentiment, I hate socialists, but I hate our country, our government even more.
Despise.
That is an extremely radical term.
Despise. Look at it's 1776 too, invoking this, this whole American Revolution history, and I mean, they're calling him a gentleman. They're identifying with Omali Yeshitela. This is probably when has he ever reached this many people? Because we've been so censored over the years,
Exactly, and this is we've been saying this for so long now that this guy who says I hate socialism, but I hate what my government, right?
Despise.
He doesn't actually hate socialism. Mm-hmm. He hates a cartoon that he's been told socialism is. Your job as a communist, you in the audience, is to make him understand the truth about what socialism is. That socialism in America is a government of, by, and for the people. Yep. If he identifies with the bourgeois revolution of 1776, you take those progressive ideals put down by Thomas Paine and you explain how in the modern context, that means socialism. That's all you got to do. And they get on board. They get on board like that. I'm telling you, I do this all day. And people are like, no, you're crazy. They're evil conservatives. And that right there Let me tell you, we don't have a right wing in this country. We have an anti-left.
Yep.
Because it is that condescension that keeps people away, that keeps people saying, I hate leftists, because they look down on people and dismiss them without giving them a chance.
And the left
All
is
you gotta-
the left. What they're against
Exactly.
is the ghost, an artificial construction of the state to oppose an actual communist left that a left that has been targeted for many years. To oppose that real communist left, they've propped up the fake left that has led to a right that's actually not a right, but a not left, whose whole politics is surrounded by just not being left. That's why if you look at the Republican Party, perhaps with some exceptions in the working class base of the MAGA movement, all that you really find is anti-wokeism as a form of politics, which is just empty. It has no actual content, and it's nothing but a mirror of the wokeism that you find in the liberal part of the empire. But look at this. We've been saying for a long time that a lot of the people in the Midwest that we're around, the working class people that voted for Trump and that became the working class base of the MAGA movement, they don't do it because of some of the more bigoted statements that Trump makes here and there. A lot of them, in our experience at least, do it in spite of it. They do it in spite of it. If they could have Trump without some of the bigoted things, they would much prefer that without some of the comments on women, on immigrants, etc. Even when you look at the speeches, the people in the background, every time Trump says one of these lunatic things about immigrants, the people in the background are like, but then when he said something about the states, they're clapping. And just so people understand how it is that most working class people in the Midwest, and I know there's a lot of cosmopolitan elite attitudes in the coastal regions. I'm not talking about Danny. That became an internal joke. Calling Danny
we've started referring to Danny as our coastal elite,
which is ridiculous.
They ran me out of the Midwest, man.
But there's so many assumptions about what these people are like, and I think this comment says a lot. Vote Trump for this man's sake. He doesn't deserve this. What's implicit there? What's implicit there is not this figure of Trump as the bigot person that is anti-black or anti-immigrant or whatever. What's implied there is Trump as someone that will tear down what the deep state is doing to dissenting voices, and in this case, a black communist. So we might say they're wrong about Trump, but that sentiment is positive. It is objectively positive.
I just want to ask, I don't have it pulled up in front of me. Are there any racist remarks from white nationalists in the comments here? Because anytime you put Tucker Carlson and point to something progressive or positive he said, that's what, some leftists will say. Don't you know he's a white nationalist? I'm looking at this. I don't see any, but maybe there's some.
The FBI arrested this guy for voicing his opinion. Unbelievable. Thank you, Tucker. As a white South African who has experienced both apartheid and post-apartheid South Africa, I've come to realize the importance of free speech. You may disagree 100% with what people have to say, but just let them voice their opinions. Boy, this guy is at 82, as sharp as a tack, unlike our president. Fuck Joe Biden. Protecting free speech means protecting speech you disagree with. One of the brightest 82-year-olds I've ever seen. We wouldn't have ever heard this if it wasn't for Tucker Carlson. Thank God for him. I don't trust my government. I no longer trust the justice system. Where do we go from here? I am not in favor of socialism, but this man has the right to speak freely without fear of arrest. I mean, it's just, they're all like this. As a black person, I could tell you that this man doesn't understand that. Regardless of his race, he is American. He also shares a lot in common with the people who were jailed, censored, and demonetized on January 6th. So it's insane. The sentiments, the popular sentiments from the people. And I mean, we can keep going. There's so many, but they're all sharing in the fact that they're disgusted by what's being done to a black communist. They disagree with it. A lot of them are going as far as to saying that they agreed with the stuff that Omali was saying. They're grateful for Tucker for getting this voice out there to ears that wouldn't have otherwise heard it. So how can you, as a Marxist, as a communist, as someone whose sole purpose is to bring the working class over to this conscious class struggle for the conquest of political power, how can you oppose these activities? You can't be able to see things in the contradictions that they embody. And when Tucker says something wrong, be there to explain why it's wrong. And when he says something right, be there to give him the applause that he deserves for getting the voice of a black communist out to millions of ears. First it was Putin, and now it's Omali Yeshitela. Objectively positive developments.
I mean, that's an extraordinary, it's an illegal document. When we've appealed this thing, and we immediately went to court on this thing after 9 months of being held in a kind of legal purgatory, where we were just unindicted co-conspirators, which meant that we didn't have legal standing, and we couldn't go to court and say, hey, these people have just looted us, and they have handcuffed us, and they've shut down entire neighborhoods, refused to allow people to enter their homes. This is pre-dawn. Or leave without showing identification. They've done all of these things, and we can't go to court and complain about it because we have no legal standing, because for 9 months we weren't charged with anything. They've just stolen all of this materials. They've looted our files. They've taken laptops and iPads and iPhones and things like that. So it's 9 months before they even indict us. And before that, they offered a $10 million bounty for any information that on the man, Alexander Ionov, who they said was the Russian for whom we were working, and on anybody who could provide information on us. They've offered a $10 million bounty. And this is even after they've stolen, looted everything they've got. They have no case because there is nothing there. It's a totally fabricated case that they've made against us, and it's extraordinarily dangerous because, like what you said, first of all, just to be historically factual, the Second Amendment was not something that was written for me or black people. I mean, the fact is that the law that governed most of the relationship for the longest period of time was something that came out in 1857, Supreme Court ruling around Dred Scott, which was right here in St. Louis, where the court ruled that black man had no rights that a white man had to respect. This is when Dred Scott thought that getting to St. Louis, which was supposed to have been a no-slave state, would mean that he was free after leaving a place where he had been a slave. The court said, no, you have no rights. And so that was in 1857. And what it took to overturn that ruling was not another court ruling immediately, but a civil war. And so this is what has informed our relationship. So we have now de jure rights, but de facto has not been the case. And that's why you can look at all of the data, the statistics revolving around the conditions of existence of African people in this country comparatively. And you see that it's only by law that we're supposed to have rights, but in fact, these rights don't exist. And what I have done and what our organization has done is move from this simpering kind of a politic that's based on pleading and begging and trying to come into the system based on some assumption that the contradiction is racism or the ideas or the opinions that white people have about black people. What I have done is said that's not the fundamental contradiction. The fundamental contradiction is colonialism. It's domestic colonialism. And it applies right here in this country where foreign and alien power kidnapped me. That somebody would like to talk about this country being a country of, how do they call it, immigrants. But we're not immigrants. We were captives and brought here in chains. And the only group other than the indigenous people themselves who didn't come here looking for a better way of life. People may or may not like what I'm saying or agree with it, and that's all right. But I'm saying it. And the point is the United States government attacked me, and they use this assault with the assumption that there are a lot of white people who don't like what I'm saying and therefore will agree with what the government is doing, despite the fact that no facts to substantiate what they're claiming that we did. And so this is the kind of public opinion that they think will weigh in their favor. But the point is that the Second Amendment and the constitutional rights, free speech, freedom of assembly, protection from what is it called? This attack on illegal search and seizure. This was done for groups of people who had left England and left other places and left the despotism of kings and things like that and wanted to have some rights. And so they made these rights. But these rights also were given to them on indigenous land, where black people, had done much of the work to build on this land, etc. They were not for us. It was only a bloody struggle that black people were bombed in, where churches were bombed, leaders assassinated, just for trying to join Joe Biden's party. And so now we're at this place where they are coming at Second Amendment rights that were not made for me, but were made for white people. And that means that if this door is open.
But may I ask you a question though? Yeah. So, but this is being done by the administration that tells us constantly how much they love and worship black people. They love black people. No one's more black people in the Biden administration. And no one has cheered that on more loudly than the New York Times and the Washington Post, which also love black people, probably a lot more than you do. So they come to your defense at all? Any of these?
Not at all.
Yeah, why? That's kind of weird.
No, and it's really a real serious kind of contradiction.
Yo, pause it.
Able.
He said the New York Times loves black people more than.
Yo,
dude, Tucker Carlson is funny, man. That was great.
Yo, Carlos, at some point, I think to do justice to Omali Yeshitela, we got to get into the syncopation and the rhythm, because he's one of the greatest speakers we have in the class struggle. So if it's okay, even if you just play like 1 minute, could you just get him at regular speed for us? I come from a different generation, bro. Like, Just if we could play this statement at a regular speed, you know, and then go back to what y'all do, man.
I get what you're saying. No, he's extremely eloquent. I think he's knocking it out of the park. There, of course, we come from a different theoretical perspective. For us, the question of colonialism is one that's derivative from the question of capitalism and the development of capitalism as a form of life, rooted first and foremost in the enclosure of the commons, the kicking out of European peasants of the commons, creating the conditions for private property, allowing for the development of the capitalist mode of life, the accumulation of capital, and then that intensifies with the process of colonialism. Modern capital is colonialism. So the central contradiction for us is capitalism, and colonialism is but one of the stages that capitalism has needed, one of the moments in order to develop imminently into what it has become, the modern stage of imperialism or neo-imperialism, if you want to call it that. There's other small, theoretical differences that we might have. We consider, for instance, Black Americans to be Black Americans, like most Black Americans do. And we think that even the idea of America in terms of the US is absurd without the contributions of the Black freedom movement, which is the heart and soul of the class struggle here in the US. And he seems to be working from a different perspective. But in this case, that doesn't matter. He's someone being attacked by the deep state for saying truths about imperialism, and is now, I think, knocking it out of the park to an audience of millions of people.
I was going to make a...
colonialism follows the logic of capital.
No, you're a bit far away from the mic. You seem.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to say that colonialism follows the logic of capital rather than, capital following the logic of colonialism. But like Crocus is saying, it doesn't matter. These ways we organize the state of being in our minds matters a whole lot less than the direct political question of should the deep state be persecuting this organization, right? If they are free, are they fighting for something progressive against our ruling class? That's all you need. I don't need to say, well, I disagree. Like our whole thing is Du Bois as the father of American Marxism, the actualization of the American people. And this guy clearly thinks differently, but it doesn't matter. I would work with them in a heartbeat, because they're on the side of the people. And when it comes down to it, the ideas are going to stand on their own. I don't need to demonize him for a disagreement that's not antagonistic. That would be crazy. And so when people tell you like, oh, you're platforming so-and-so, that's not real. Put all that aside. Things are getting real now. It's time to be serious and hold ourselves to a much higher standard. I'm talking about up here.
And I like what we were saying earlier, Noah, off camera. We get a lot of inquiries and people shouting us out and how you doing, and I'm a big fan. And Noah responds, that's cool, but we don't need fans. We need comrades. We need organizers. We need activists. And
we need fighters.
No matter where you are, whether you're in St. Louis or Minnesota, anywhere in the country, in the world, organize, meet your neighbors, form a tenants association, find out what local struggles going on, get out. I always say, get out from this side of the screens, get on the other side of the screens, make history. It's not enough to interpret history. We have to change history and make history in that Marxist spirit. I thought this was a beautiful comment from Reclaimed Dason. Also remember, he's not a Black nationalist, he's a pan-nationalist. That brought me back to Fred Hampton, when Fred Hampton said, we say all power, we say Black power to Black people, we say Puerto Rican power to Puerto Rican people, we say Chicano power to Chicano people, we say purple power to purple people. So uniting all of these different rivulets, small rivers of struggle into one mighty torrent of working class unity and struggle. And shout out to St. Louis again. That anonymous, faceless, nameless, infamous Teamster out there. Everyone knows who I'm talking about. Gave me a dope tour, and you're saying only 1/4 of St. Louis is left. 3/4 of the population left. And on the East Coast, us coastal elites, we don't know what depopulation looks like. So shout out to the work that everyone is doing out there in St. Louis. Extremely important. I mean, just some of these images begin to tell the story. I'll just give one quick anecdote that I learned from Kyle out there. East St. Louis became one of the poorest. East St. Louis is in Illinois. St. Louis is in Missouri. And what they did in the state of Missouri, they did not allow the Black fathers to live in the public housing. So they were forced to move across the bridge into Illinois. Racist state laws, that legacy of the Dred Scott case and the ongoing white supremacy. And there's no question that all the contradictions exist with Tucker Carlson. But hey, we got to take advantage of these strange alliances and little windows of opportunity.
Absolutely.
You know what I think? I think we should stop thinking it's our job to tell other people how wrong they are. Prove instead that we are correct and can build something real and mainstream and build up something that has the gravitas to actually stake a claim on what is correct and what is not.
Yeah. Let the correctness of your ideas be proven in practice.
Let me just respond to Reclaimed Dassin because, oh man, well, it turns out I'm not a coastal elite. I'm a New York City elite. So I appreciate you calling me out because it's Baltimore, it's North Philly, it's Camden. Nah, right here in the Bronx and in Brownsville as well. So I didn't mean to speak for the whole Eastern Seaboard. Thanks for checking me on that.
Disrespecting 1/4 of the country out here.
Reclaimed likes to try to point out all that kind of stuff. That's his thing.
I think we're clearly at a moment where we have to stress unity with all who align with us on the principal issues of war and peace, on the principal issues of bringing down the dictatorial power of capital and the elite, whether they phrase it in one way or another. There has to be some broad coalition of anti-establishment, pro-people forces that are centered on a coherent anti-imperialist line. And in most revolutionary struggles, that has been what has won out. A unity of the people. An anti-monopoly coalition has been one term that's been floated around in the history of American communism. I think an anti-monopoly, anti-imperialist coalition is something that our people are ripe for. That seems to be a common ground for all the different areas of dissent. And I'm confident enough in Marxism that if there is such a platform of unity or a coalition with all dissenting forces to U.S. imperialism, I'm confident enough in Marxism's ability to explain to these other worldviews the situation at hand in a way that's much more coherent, in a way that explains it a whole lot better, and in a way that wins them over to this more advanced outlook and interpretation of the current situation and how to move forward. That's something that we see in the Cuban Revolution, something that we see in the Chinese. Most revolutions that have been successful, it's been a unity of different forces. And I think we're going to have to see something similar here in the U.S.
To occur, and especially, we talk about Biden, if we just take it on a personal level, which is not necessarily where I was intending to go, but if you take it just on a personal level, we're talking about Biden, who claims to be the great liberal, a white man who loves us. We're talking also about the guy who was opposed to the Civil Rights Bill, talking about the guy who was opposed to busing because he didn't want his children to have to go to school in a jungle. et cetera, just on a personal level. And but here they have never had to offer African people anything. When they run for office, it's not because they're offering us anything. They're frightening Black people. They say, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get Trump, who is a demon, or you're going to get the Republicans, who are demons, or you're going to get what we characterize as fascism, et cetera. So they don't have to promise Black people anything except they swear they'll protect us from the other white people. That's one aspect of it. And then there's a whole body of folk who are employed through things like welfare, slavery, and programs that they create it's a whole array of folk that employ liberals based on that. And what we stand for is self-determination. We also believe in reparation, but the point is that we have in St. Louis alone, we have in 7 contiguous blocks in St. Louis, economically depressed sector, we purchased something like 20 some odd properties, and we put businesses and other kinds of things there. That's not permissible. We are supposed to get in line for welfare or something like that. And we are teaching African people that you can be self-determining. There is an alternative to what you got. But the whole Democratic Party apparatus rests upon this foundation of welfare slavery. And this is where they would have Black people located. And so the Democratic Party, you can't say that they lied to us, whether it was Obama or whether it was this guy, Biden. You can't say they lied to us because they didn't promise us anything, except they would protect us from Trump, from the Republican Party. And I'm not a Trump person or Republican person. I'm for the liberation of Black people. And that's why this whole thing about working for Russians is so ridiculous. I'm not looking for.
Before he goes into that, I think it's so interesting how he talks about the Democratic Party enslaving Black people with a form of welfare. I think there's a lot of people that are going to listen to that in Tucker's audience and are going to think about some of the arguments against welfare and the forms of dependency and power relations that it creates between the capitalist state and the masses of people. And that's something that, a while back we had the song, the Oliver Anthony song, that had a line about welfare that a lot of people got angry about. And at that time, we took a position that was clear, which is that this is a sentiment that a whole lot of people have in the Midwest. And frankly, if people got paid enough to survive, they got paid what the fruits of their labor produce, they wouldn't need the state to subsidy the capitalist class, not them, the capitalist class, so that they can keep bringing their wage slaves back to work. So there's a kernel of truth there. And Omali's expressing it in a different form, but I'm sure that when it lands on the ears of the working class people who find a form of dignity in work and in not taking, what is it that the government hand-me-downs or something, government handouts, they're going to see a point of commonality there. And frankly, as communists, is not what we're about. I mean, I'm in favor of some form of reform that eases the conditions of misery of the people under. I mean, I'm on welfare, so I'm not against welfare, but it's not liberation. And to a certain extent, it prevents struggles much deeper, much more systematic in character.
Well, what it does is get people, and what he's trying to explain, I think, is it gets people dependent on the certain political organization of the ruling class that will continue it. Right? So you got the Democrats who say they will continue it, the Republicans who say they will cut it. Once you get people filtered into that and get the working class subsidizing our own thing, because this is through our tax money, right? It's subsidizing our own wages so that the boss don't got to pay us enough to live on. You then sort of force them, and that's what he's saying, like, it forces them so that the Democrats are who you're sort of de facto supposed to support, because otherwise they take that away. Don't worry, we'll protect your dependency on us from the other people who want to take that away, right? either way, it's a dependency on this other class. And for us as communists, it should be about freedom from that class, right? Being able to do it on their own. We don't need them. We don't need them. They need us.
Yeah, very, very eloquent. We're at 778. Keep hitting that boost and share. It'd be beautiful to hit 1,000. What's our record so far?
I think it was yours. Yours got to like 1,600 or something.
Yeah, that's exciting. Shout out to all the comrades. We trying to find a name for the comrades out there supporting the Fidelistas. Well, we still brainstorming. Fidelistas isn't exactly Midwestern, so I did want to just share something about people have brought it up about Omali Yeshitela being 82 years of age. I did want to say a few things. So this is the chairman here. This is that's Ernesto Desalin, my 21-year-old. That's an old school comrade. That's Uncle Norm. And then there's Kawa Amadu, my 16-year-old. And of course the chairman, Omali Yeshitela. And you can't tell. You can tell a little bit, but 82 years old, that dude is cut. That dude is diesel. That dude is a martial artist. I mean, that dude goes hard ideologically, physically. There's no question he inspired Stickman and M1. If y'all follow Stickman and his pivots of revolutionary training and exercise, it reminds me a lot of the organizing. We used to use the boxing and all these different things to organize. So when I got to march, this was a march in D.C., I think right before they got raided, and it was against the proxy war on Russia to expose it and to say, put that money into our communities. We need that money. But yeah, Omali Yeshitela is truly an inspiring individual. We know why they why they've gone after him.
And you've been very outspoken as the director of the Institute's international department against that. You did a video not long ago expressing solidarity with the Uhuru movement from these attacks, vicious attacks, that I think the more the American people hear about them, the more disgusted they'll be by their government cracking down on the Uhuru movement and the African People's Socialist Party.
The Jackie can't hold in those guns. I was thinking the same thing.
What was it? What was that thing called? The physiognomy or whatever? Where your outer appearance reflects your soul.
Oh, nice.
So if you got like this like on point soul like he's got, that's reflected. And then look at Biden, same age, falling apart, wandering up the stage during interviews. I'm just saying.
Oh my goodness. Embarrassing. Imagine how the world looks at us.
We're gonna
right? That's our president. Imagine you're just Chinese, right? And you're sitting around, you're talking to your buddies at work or whatever, and they're like, America's been after us. Do you think they're gonna start a war? And you just go, look at their president, dude. Like, this is a people who allow an old man clearly with dementia to lead their entire nation. I don't think we got much to worry about,
In that official report that came out, the night that he came out after the Tucker Carlson thing and tried to respond to it, the report was like, we feel bad for this dear old elderly gentleman. Like, the report expressed like actual condolences and sincerity. Like, that's how intense it was. And then Biden after he does his little teleprompters, he like walks off and then he pretends to come back like all it was so pathetic. I don't get it. Has to be that the Zionists and the capitalists and the scum of the scum, when I see Biden, y'all are too young. It's not your fault, to quote Cat Stevens. But do y'all remember Weekend at Bernie's? Weekend at Bernie's, they go stay at Bernie's spot on the coast. I don't know if it's the Jersey coast, Malibu. But Bernie dies and they feel responsible, but they're scared and they don't want no one to know that Bernie's dead. So the old dude Bernie, they put him in the front seat. They put sunglasses on him. They got the Corvette, and they drive around like he's still alive.
They do more than that. They like put him on a line between the two of them, and they're like walking around. Weekend at Bernie's is one of the best movies of the 80s.
No spoilers, Noah. No spoilers. So when I see Joe Biden, I think of Weekend at Bernie's. You know, I got another interview. I got to duck out. I'll just end with one last ideological. Well, if I can get two ideological points, maybe 30 seconds each. So yeah, every day they tell us, you know, Trump is coming. The Trump threat. I got some family that can overhear me too. That I want them to hear this. You know, but what there's going to be more than the genocide of an indigenous people in the Middle East. There's going to be more than the fascism that we're confronting. So they hang over this looming threat as they continually destroy whatever constitutional rights are left. And I see we're just about to hit 800 between Discord and Twitter and YouTube. Super exciting. Thanks for all the support. Last ideological point. You all brought this up a few minutes back. Like the Democrats and Republicans pretend to be at each other's throats and they hate each other. But when Juan Guaido shows up at the Oval Office, every Republican, every Democrat high-fiving about this snitch Juan Guaido in Venezuela. And when it comes to hate in China, they compete to vilify China. And when it comes to Cuba, when it comes to any sovereign swath of the globe, we see exactly how imperialists from AOC all the way on down to these zealots, you know, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. So I got another commitment. Great job, y'all. All power to the people. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you so much for coming on, brother. Good luck.
Thank you.
I wanted to, I actually got into a conversation with a debate of sorts with an old friend who stuck in the quote unquote progressive Bernieite camp. And it was on the question of Trump and the upcoming elections. And it's interesting because you make the argument for why we shouldn't vote for someone funding a genocide, cracking down on communists. You make all of these arguments about why Biden is literally just dog shit, imperialist dog shit. And their mind almost automatically goes to, but Trump did this, but Trump did that, which is very strange because it was almost as if they couldn't understand that the critique of Biden was not like an approval of Trump. I know what Trump has done. I'm not supporting either of them. Now, the MAGA movement is something different, like the working class people in there. I think there's potential. But it's clear that, one of the things that he kept on going back to was, do you think as a communist that you can work easier under a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency? And it's like, dude, do you not see how Biden is treating communists that are doing things in their communities? Do you not see how the social medias at the behest of the powers that be are censoring like crazy, stealing people's abilities to financially sustain themselves on the hard, time-consuming labor that they do to inform the people, to educate them, to challenge the narratives of empire? Like, it's already here. And then when you look at Trump's working class base, which I think you can see its spirit on this question in Tucker's comments, it's the complete opposite. They see their struggle as one that's rooted in ending the conditions that led to what they're doing to Omali Yeshitela. Some of them even further. Some of them are able to identify the struggle that they're in as one that is either homologous or the same one as the one that Omali is painting as a black communist. So it's just so upside down. And we have to remember that when they say we're going to crack down on the communist, these are people that think those that run the World Economic Forum are communists. These are people that think the elite are communists. So
once you're very clearly, as we are, and other groups that are actually communist, against the powers that be, against the elite, against the so-called deep state, it becomes very evident that that thing they're calling communism is not communism. Or they might want to label you something else that's not communism so that they keep their worldview coherent and calling those that are in power communism. Their anti-communism is devoid of content. It's empty because the thing that they label communism is not actually communism. The thing that they hate, it's not actually what they're calling it. What they hate is the elite. What they hate is the capitalist imperialist system. And this is the progressive kernel that has been found in one of these forms of dissent that we have in the modern age that takes the form of the MAGA movement. They might talk about cracking down on communists. They might support it. They might talk about how much they hate communists. But when you ask them, what do you mean by communists? They're talking about the people we think should be cracked down on, which are the elite. They're not talking about us. When you put us or someone like us in front of them, they feel like, oh, this guy's on my side. This guy's on, Trump is going to fight for this guy. That's why there was one comment that literally said, one of the most liked comments, we need Trump to come back so that this stops happening. I mean, come on, man. Don't just interpret things directly how it seems. Don't just scratch the surface of the world and then base an analysis of that. Don't just scratch the surface with the narratives that the liberals give you and just radicalize it a little more and call it Marxism. No, have an actual concrete study of the way that things are, and you'll see that the liberal and leftist narrative of the last 8 years is baseless. It's not true, and perhaps even worse than it not being true, it's ineffective. We are in a worse condition as a so-called left today than we were 8 years ago in terms of organization, in terms of moving forward with some form of institutional body. And there's people continuing this analysis that led us here to nowhere.
And at a certain point, when that doesn't work and backfires and backfires and backfires, you got to wonder what their motivations are for continuing to do it, right? On both sides of this, right? The progressives who are talking about these evil, racist conservatives and the conservatives who are talking about these evil commies, it's definition mongering, right? It is allowing this sort of vague, abstract notion of a thing to inform how they look at the real world. It's letting this idea come first rather than looking at the real world and then letting it create an idea. That is defaulting to a definition, a predefined, static thing. But we are in a period of immense political change, right? What we are seeing is not, communists pandering to the right. What we are seeing is forces that would have been reactionary losing a lot of their reactionary character because of the intensification of the contradictions of capitalism itself. What we're seeing from the other angle, right, is not commies taking over and, controlling everything. We're seeing the crumbling of capitalism. And so when they're confronted by a communist saying, those elites you hate that you call communists, look at me. I'm the director of a Marxist Theory Institute, right? The Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. And I'm telling you right now, those people are my enemy. And they look at communists in a whole different light. If I tell them, I've been a communist my whole life, those people are capitalists. We hate them too. We call them capitalists. Why are we arguing over the sounds our mouths make? Why are we not fighting them together? Because fighting them is what we need to do to survive. They get that. And so you see how these two conflicting versions of definition mongering seem set up to just get us to endlessly fight each other on whose behalf, right? The behalf of the leadership of each of those, which are nothing else but those elites, right? So on the one hand, you have the progressives that say they're against, as Bernie puts it, the millionaires and billionaires, right? And on the other hand, you have the conservatives who are against the elites, the globalists, whatever. They're talking about the same people. And then the definition mongering enters the picture, and you get all these working class people fighting each other, mocking each other, just pointlessly and needlessly wasting all of their time and energy. When all we got to do, and if we are communists, this is our job, all we got to do is stand up, get between these two sides, and say, look up there. That's where the problem is. How have we let them get us all against each other? And yeah, I'm sorry, Reclaimed. All my impersonations get a C+ at best.
Oof, spitting fire.
My son does a great Obama, though, by the way.
As T. Morgan says here, jokingly, I need to send money angles. We have been demonetized. I want to remind you all, we've been demonetized. There's 820 people on. They took away almost the same amount, not almost the same amount, a little bit over that in February that you all donated to us in the first 12 days of the month. They really hit our pockets here at the Institute. So if you want to help, the most minimal donation, $1, $2, whatever you're able to give, it does go a long way, especially if we do it at mass, grassroots, and get that going little by little. We know our audience is a working class audience. We're not expecting anyone to give a lot, but if you support our work, our educational work, or the books we put out, the classes we host, and everything else like that, I want to keep that going. Please do make sure to contribute. For the price of a coffee, you can help us continue and expand our operations. But let's get this interview played.
Another master. I'm trying to get rid of the whole relationship that presupposes that we will be servants of anybody.
I mean, given that you haven't actually done anything, you're not accused of doing anything that isn't already legal, exercising rights that are guaranteed to you from birth till death under the U.S. Constitution, I'm a little bit surprised that nobody has defended you in the U.S. media. Now, I will say your name sounds non-mainstream of your organization, but once you learn,
like Obama.
Yeah, right, exactly. Fair. Barack Hussein Obama. But once you learn the details of this, you'd think there would be at least one civil libertarian at the New York Times editorial page or the Washington Post or NBC News or CNN or any of these groups. Has anybody said a word about an armored personnel carrier showing up at your house for speaking, for talking?
No, we've had to go out and really work. I mean, in July of this year, we had a meeting, a conference, and we pulled together something like 40 different organizations and what have you to unite as a part of a free speech, anti-colonial free speech movement who are pushing back on this. And I think that includes one organization of lawyers and what have you. But generally speaking, we haven't been able to get anything. Even so-called progressive black politicians and what have you have not stepped forward. But you also got to remember, we're talking about a period where it's impermissible even to say things. Well, you can say from sea to shining sea. You cannot say from how's it go, from the river? Is it from the river to the sea? You know. I mean, it's incredible. The attack that's being made on the right of people to speech. And by the way, as a point of information, I've been arrested several times on the question of speech. I was arrested in Florida. They created a law called incitement to riot. Didn't have to be a riot. I just had to want one to happen when I spoke. I mean, they put me in jail and threatened to put me in prison for having done that. So this question of speech is a really critical issue, and people need to pay attention. I was under assault in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1996. Some 300 cops, National Guard troops attacked our building, set houses on fire, used all kinds of machinations, including the FBI, because they were concerned that we were protesting and speaking out against the police having killed an 18-year-old youngster, and the grand jury having said it was all right for that to occur. And we were having a meeting and they didn't want me to talk. And so they attacked the building. They said in our own building, they said that that you have something like 5 minutes to get out of the building because this is an illegal meeting. We own the building. And so they attacked it. So the free speech question, and that the problem is they did this in plain view. People saw it happen. They brought, the people in the community actually brought a helicopter down by gunfire. This is how intense it was. And not a single civil libertarian stepped forward to say, why are you attacking these people for just speech?
Well, but I'm
incredible.
confused. So you're describing basically what the Black Lives Matter people said 4 years ago. Some of them got legit rich out of it. You don't seem like you've gotten rich. And they got all this money from Apple, the biggest companies in the world. And of course, the media cheerled them. How did you miss out on that?
Well, because the thing is, like, to say Black Lives Matter is such an empty slogan. It's a whine rather than a demand. It's empty. I mean, Joe Biden says Black Lives Matter. I mean, you have the whole Democratic Party, Congress and whatever, get out on one knee with kente cloth from Ghana over their shoulder saying Black Lives Matter. Because it doesn't mean anything. It's a non-statement. But what we say is Black people have to have power. So we want power over our own life. That's the question. And that's the basis for the difference in how they would treat Black Lives Matter and how they would treat us. And you're right. The Black Lives Matter slogan is almost a Zuckerberg manufactured slogan. Certainly if it's not manufactured by Zuckerberg, it's certainly promoted by Zuckerberg and all the white people who love us.
So tell us about what else. I wasn't aware of this. I was talking to someone on your staff.
I love how he describes the liberals and the liberal establishment as all the white people who love us. That is so hilarious. And I like how it's just snuck in there, right? Like it's just offhanded. This guy's a very charismatic leader. I haven't thought about that slogan in a while, but I think he's not wrong, right? That that when the ruling class are doing these performances, like getting on one knee and chanting this slogan, or doing their land acknowledgements and whatever else they do, all their performative virtue signaling, it inherently sort of corporatizes and makes whatever the issue is, if it was at one time real plastic, it completely nullifies any real meaning it has, because at that point, that giant power has taken it. And so any people who genuinely owned it beforehand no longer do. And what he's saying is not wrong, right? People need power over their own lives, right? This dependency and wanting us to beg for things, all of us, not just the Black community, but the entire working class. That's the point. And as Minor Threat, great name, by the way, says right here, he's not begging. That is why they go after him, because he stands up as a man, as a human being, right? As a leader of his community, and says, no, I'm not going to beg. I don't want to be dependent on you. And that's not what they want, right? The reason right opportunists, especially the ones who have the goal to call themselves communists, tell us, oh, we got to work with the Democrats. Nobody's ready for communism. Blah, blah, blah. The reason they continually take this sort of lesser evil stance, underneath it all is the same thing. What they're doing is begging, is saying, please, ruling class, please be nice to us. Please just be nice to us. And you know what? They've done that for decades. And look where it's gotten us. It's gotten us here. So I say, I mean the same thing he's saying, right? I say it's time we stop begging. I say it's time we start fighting. And I say we get together and create the concrete organizational capacity to wage a real fight. What do you think, Carlos?
Couldn't agree more. I think that's what's missing. The attitudes of the vast majority of the American people are clearly dissenting attitudes towards the established order. We've got into a condition where, to put it in Marxist-Leninist terms, the people cannot go on in the old way. And it's clear that as the contradictions between the ruling class itself, one, within the dimensions of imperialism that Omali actually describes quite eloquently at the beginning of the interview, and two, amongst themselves within the U.S., the struggles against Trump and the MAGA base, etc., it becomes clearer and clearer that the ruling class itself cannot continue to go on in the old way. So this is what was considered to be essential for the communist tradition to constitute an objective condition for revolution. So it's clearly missing, and this is what the whole effort of my book, The Purity, Fetish, and the Crisis of Western Marxism, tries to outline. What's missing is a clear outlook, the correct framework to understand the crisis and help us build the sort of organization that helps us take advantage of the revolutionary, objectively revolutionary conditions that we exist under, and focus on the principal contradictions at hand. Unite the people around those and fight the fight that only communists can actually fight with consciousness and with appropriate aim.
Yeah. And, it makes me think about all of the bourgeois theories that sort of try to pass themselves off as Marxism or some, form of progressiveness or left or whatever it is, right? And why all of these, the sort of middle class milieu that follow these theories seem to have a problem with people like us, people like, the infrared collective. I don't think it's largely for the reasons they cognize, whatever, subjective view they have in the moment. I think, and I haven't really researched this or looked into it deeply, but this is how it feels to me. All of these theories somehow end up with the majority of working people being instructed to be in some way submissive and weak. Right? Like asking for help, begging for help, being apologetic, whatever it is. It's always submissiveness and not fighting. And we stand up tall and we say, no, we want you to be strong. We want you to fight. We want you to fight. Like what Danny was referring to either when someone very kindly, by the way, was like, I'm a big fan, blah, blah, blah. I said, that's great. But we don't want fans. We want fighters. I think that's why these, middle-class leftists have a problem with us. They don't want to fight because they have no fight. They want submission, right? Begging the ruling class to be nice. Please, ruling class, be nice. And when we put our foot down, we say, we need to be strong. We need to fight back. They say, but look how good you have it. It could be worse. And that's really what's underlying it is this big, I wish I could think of a better word for it, but I can't, brother. I think what we need, excuse me. Yeah, go ahead.
So Noah's slowly dying there on camera.
Sorry, I had a frog in my throat.
I'm trying to see how I can. There we go. And I think the paradox is that this is something that I think most people agree with, and yet just hasn't materialized. Just rest in peace, Noah. Yes. I put a joke in the private chat to him, and I think that was the cause. So cause of death is
Yeah, that got me.
But that's one of
It was a
the
good dad
paradox.
joke, though. It was.
It was a very dad joke. I mean, we could say it. It was Noah said we don't need fans, we need fighters, and I told him we don't need fans, we need ACs, air conditioners. Extremely stupid joke, very low level, low IQ joke.
Don't get me like I like the. Go on.
It's his type of joke. Yeah, it was Noah reincarnating himself through me to tell himself that joke.
Well, you're a dad now, so
there you
welcome
go.
to the club, brother.
Yes. But there's something to this category that's devised by a few philosophers, one of which I think the original one was Peter Sloterdijk, not someone within our tradition, but the notion of cynical ideology, how people can simultaneously know things, but yet continue to act as if they don't know it. And I think that's something that is operative in the world that we live in. And one of the examples of that is the fact that most people are conscious of the fact that it would be to the benefit of the interests of the class struggle to focus on unity and the principal things. And then in their actions, they act in ways that are completely contrary, or they don't act at all. So how do we bridge that? I think that's going to be one of the central questions that has to be tackled, and that in part is being tackled already. But let's see if we can finish this interview and then get to the next segment of what's becoming a very long stream already.
This morning, it's not just the government that went after you. And I should say, you haven't gone on trial. You're not convicted of anything. I mean, you're not a criminal. Okay. But it sounds like business has aligned against you as well. If you wouldn't mind explaining what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. I mean, we've been sanctioned by banks like we are some kind of hostile country. The banks that we've done more than 20 years of businesses with, we've never missed a payment. We really disciplined in terms of taking care, and sometimes paid earlier than what was due. And the banks, Regions Banks, one big bank that they kicked us off. They even some members of our movement, their personal accounts have shut down. They shut us down. They forced the payment of something like an $80,000 mortgage thing that we had, and we were given something like 2 weeks to pay it off. We've had similar things happening from another bank. We've had some 130,000 signatures that have been collected on petitions that were calling on people to take the United States before the United Nations for violation of the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. They were taken down, disappeared, because, as you know, the U.S. government claims that the work that we were doing on a tour, participating with the United Nations trip throughout the United States in 6 cities, and we were collecting petitions on that and talking about reparations, that the Russians paid us to do that. So they took that down. I guess it must be some kind of evidence of a crime that we committed. We don't know. It just disappeared. And then in terms of, and that was just one of the banks, by the way. There was another bank that did a similar thing. And just recently, we had a situation where within the last week or so, 10 days at least, the fiscal, how do you characterize it, sponsor that we use, because we really want to have this thing be quite transparent and quite above board, because we've had to spend $200 and just about $250,000 already just in legal fees alone. And we have this process where people can make contributions to us. And the fiscal sponsor that has been dealing with something like 600 different entities that they function as fiscal sponsors of, suddenly decided they were going out of business. And of the 6 top, we were 5 or 6 among the top forces in terms of money going into that. And others of them have not, the 5 of them have not even been operational for the last 2 years. So they decided they were going out of business. There's a whole bunch of coincidences happened. Coincidence that the church right across the street from my house that they attacked on July 29th, that church, coincidentally, where it had been empty for ages, and we had it under contract to purchase it in order to put programs in for the community there. That church mysteriously burned down. And then this attack on us on July 29th followed
You pause it real quick, Carlos.
an attack on.
What he just said, that church mysteriously burnt down. That's a big deal. I mean, he's listing a lot of things now, and we have been going for a while, so I think we might want to wrap this bit up. I want to say, though, that kind of stuff, we overlook the use of above board and underground weapons against us. When Tucker Carlson went to Russia, he was saying that they hacked his phone, all this stuff, right? This is the underground. And then above board, there's the media demonizations. There's the campaign to not let him back in the country, etc., right? So just remember that there's always multiple prongs of the attack, and be safe. That's all. As this fight that we're talking about concretizes, someone asked in a comment how we recommend fighting. We recommend organization, using our power as working class people together. And as this sort of concretizes and becomes a real force, they're going to come at us in different ways. So be ready for that, right? That's all I'm saying.
And as far as this one, okay, there's nothing legal about organizing. To organize, we need communication, not fight. And I was referring to fight in the sense of struggle. It's a more, I guess, American way of saying struggle, but it's,
I'm not saying go beat people up.
Yeah.
Although if they come for you, defend yourself by all means.
There you have it. So do you want to keep this rolling a little bit longer, Noah, and then switch to the discussion on the manifesto?
Yeah, it's 8:30. I have to call my mom's real quick just to make sure I don't have to go over that. For anyone who doesn't know, my mom is currently undergoing chemotherapy. So she actually lives only a few blocks from me. I'm her primary caretaker. So this is when I have to make sure she's cool. I don't need to go there tonight. So I'll be back in like 2 minutes, brother. You keep going.
All right, brother. Yep. So I'll keep this video going.
On July 2nd, 2029, where a 50-foot flagpole hosting a 15 by 25-foot red, black, and green African national flag was torched in broad daylight. And the guy who torched it wasn't even charged with arson, some kind of criminal mischief thing. I mean, it's just a host of attacks that's been made over us, and sometimes the government, and sometimes financial institutions like Regions Bank, where we've had demonstrations and whatever, but they are moving, it seems, to first of all make us spend money that we've been using to put programs on the ground. For example, on the day they attacked us, that same morning, later.
I think one of the things that should be mentioned here is the fact that all of these bourgeois freedoms, whether it's the freedom of media, freedom of speech, private property as a right, all of these things are conditional to the framework that puts capital and its accumulation as the most supreme and highest good and end. Once you start developing a property, as the Uhuru movement have been able to do in St. Louis, for the sake of building these and Tampa, for the sake of building these community projects and organizing the people and educating them and shattering the narratives of empire, the ruling class doesn't give a lick about what it has said on paper that it believes in. It doesn't care about its BS notions of rights, because those rights are not universal. rights. They are phrased as universal rights, but they're really the rights of the ruling class. They're really a way of formulating the egotistical interest of those whose sole purpose, whose sole religion is the accumulation of capital, a way of formulating those interests in a way that doesn't explicitly show what it is, which is a very particular interest antagonistic to the interests of the vast majority of society. It is that contradiction between the narrow specific interests through which the ruling class actually carries out the values that it universalizes and the universal character and how people understand those universal characters that has created the conditions for organic forms of dissent within countries like our own that got founded proclaiming the inalienable right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the fact that all men, in terms of human beings, are created equal, the right to self-determination, all of these rights, which are formulated abstractly to bring the people on board to a revolution led by a very small class, but which becomes very evident at some point that they can never live up to the enunciated values that they have proclaimed and defended their struggles with. This is not a problem of a specific government, of a specific set of bureaucrats. It's a problem integral to the system, in the same way that in the transition from Kant to Hegel, you have an understanding that the problem is not one that is epistemological. It's not one that's in the mind, but the gap is in the world itself. You have likewise in this mode of life a split between the enunciated values and the actuality, the real thing that goes on, and that split, that gap is indispensable for the system itself. That gap, that space is necessary and has been the reason why subaltern classes, oppressed people, working people have been able to use those universalist values against them, turn them against the people that formulated them cynically to bring people into movements and into struggles that their class interests were not aligned with.
Yeah, that morning we had scheduled training.
I was just hearing that as I got back. This is an area where sort of new people, sometimes middle class people especially, sort of get the wrong instinct, I think, because of all of the falsification that occurred during the New Left period and afterwards. They feel sort of superior to what they consider, the American values, not recognizing that while these were set in place by the bourgeoisie, right? Marx himself talked about these values and how using the French Revolution, the actuality of what this became a mockery of what their intent was. And so what actually works is not looking down on people for holding those values dear as the values of their homeland, but instead explaining to them exactly what Marx said, how only the working people, and you don't need to use labels at this point, right? Only the working class, the working people, you and me, can make those values real, actually concrete in reality, right? You want that right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness without your life being ransomed, right, by the healthcare system and big pharma. You want that right to liberty, to be able to find your own happiness, right, without being forced to make someone else rich in order to fulfill it. Then you need socialism. You need the people in power. You need, to put it in the American terminology, a government of, by, and for the people, where we believe that all men are created equal. Whether that's created by a God or not doesn't matter.
Beautifully said, brother.
For African women who were becoming doulas, being trained to become doulas, people who take care and make safe birth for women and for the children. In St. Louis, we have a situation where there are enough black babies dying in the first year of life to fill 15 kindergarten classes. So we're having this doula training. They attack our building. They attack our home. That did happen, but we've initiated a process where we bought properties, where we are setting up a women's center, things like that. That's the kind of stuff that they're attacking. And so they would divert the money that we would have for these programs. And you need to come to St. Louis. By the way, I heard you make some kind of suggestion that you might like me if you have dinner or something. And so that's an open invitation. Come to St. Louis.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyway, I want you to see what we're doing, because I think it's really important to get a grasp of the significance of what is happening to us.
What's crazy is Omali Yeshitela, like the vast majority of the leftists are just going around calling Tucker a crazy Nazi, bigot, sexist, all these things. Omali Yeshitela just invited him over for lunch, basically, which is insane. And that's the seasoned wit of an organizer and of someone who's been involved in politics for decades and who recognizes that you can't have this purity fetish that prevents you from even engaging with people who don't fully align to all the pure set of ideas that you have set up for yourself to constitute what can be accepted and what ought to be condemned.
Yeah.
By the way, the issue of the mortality rate of women, not just in St. Louis, but just Black women in general, is one of those cases where you really see how the de jure equality hasn't really been translated into de facto, because the mortality rate for Black babies is a lot higher than what it is for white babies. So the percentage of kids that die simply because their parents were Black and don't get the same medical treatment at the moment of birth is a lot higher. It's tied to poverty and all these other things as well, but it's another clear indicator of real differences that still exist and between different parts of the working class.
Yeah. Real quick, thank you to everyone for the kind words about my mom and everyone who said they were praying for her. That means a lot. But on this, I think people sometimes misunderstand us when we talk about, the victory of the civil rights movement as a revolution, the establishment of full bourgeois right for all. That doesn't mean that racism is gone, right? That the color line is faded and a thing of the past. No, what it does is makes all of the problems no longer this formalized, institutionalized expression, and they become more sort of real and understandable that full bourgeois right for all is not enough. And that is the importance of that revolutionary change within that this area, right? Otherwise, it's also a point of the possibility of unity, right? But yeah. That's it. Also, real quick, sorry.
Because you won't.
I would also like to say that I would totally have dinner with Tucker Carlson as well. I think give me a week with Tucker Carlson, and I will have him saying communism is good after that week's over.
Oof, sounds like a challenge.
I'm pretty confident.
Find another organization doing this, really transforming an impoverished community that's in a state of despair. I mean, we built a $150,000, a $60,000 basketball court in a place where Black children are playing in the streets, dodging cars, going back and forth, using makeshift basketball hoops from bicycle rims and things like that. You would think that the city would be applauding us, the government would be. And by the way, here's an irony, because they call this a food desert in North St. Louis where we live. And I think we got something like $80,000 or more dollars grant from the the FDA, to create and operate a farmer's market there, which is one of the most effective farmers markets that they say that's happening in the country, that the FDA has sponsored. This is who we are. And this is part of the crime that's being committed against our community, our people, because this is self-determination, and that's the problem that they have, and that's the thing that the Democratic Party has, because it relies on having this relationship with Black people who are tied to welfare slavery and not self-determination, and we won't tolerate that.
Amen. If you don't mind my asking, well, let me tell you why I'm asking. I want to ask how old you are, because I see this armored personnel carrier in front of your house. It looks like a war. And I see dozens of heavily armed FBI agents. And the presumption is that you're very dangerous. So to put that into perspective, how old are you?
I'm 82 years old. I was 82 in October. And that's why I say that this whole threat of a 15-year prison sentence is effectively a threat of a life sentence as it relates to me. But there are other younger people like Penny Hess, who is a white woman, and I'm going to mention that, who is chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and Jesse Neville, who is a youngster, who is the chair of an Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And they work primarily in the white community. And this concept, even of understanding who we are, like it's quote unquote black nationalists, we're anti-colonialist forces, but we have organizations of white people in 117 cities in this country. And what these organizations are doing is they are taking the demand for reparation. They're taking the exposure of genocide. They're talking about the injustices committed against African people. So Penny Hess and Jesse Neville, they are heads of two of those organizations that are the front of our movement in the white community. So I just want to say that we are not race-based politics. Our politics is based on this fundamental relationship, because even the concept of race comes into existence through colonialism. We are anti-colonialists, and that's a change. I mean, because it doesn't mean that we haven't always been. I have been at one juncture seriously concerned about the question of race, because I took my examples of how to explain reality from what I learned from this system. And so the racism and racism, things like that. But even the concept of race denies me of a nationality. That I'm not even a person that can be defined in relationship to a history of my own. It's a negation of my history, and even what the government has done in terms of charging me with being an agent of Russia. Like, we don't have agency as a people. I am one of the persons that was working against Joe Biden's notion. I participated in organizing people to register and vote, particularly in the state of Florida. I was in the United States military. I was there I was in Berlin when the Berlin Wall went up. I was one of those forces in one of those tanks that faced one of the first times Russian and American tanks faced each other in a combat there. I was there. And I don't know where Biden was. I don't know where he was during that period. I was there, you see. And so this whole notion that somehow I'm being manipulated. And I mentioned the thing about Florida, because I was there when the Cuban missile crisis, now I'm stationed in Georgia. And so they send a convoy of troops to go into Florida. Fort Patrick, I think it was characterized as Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. And I'm on a convoy. And I'm riding from Fort Benning, Georgia in a convoy. And we're driving down to this area near Cocoa in Florida. You know where I'm talking about. I think you live in Florida. And so we get to Palatka, Florida, and people get out on the convoy to go and eat in this restaurant. And we go in the restaurant, and the woman who's serving said, "We don't serve your kind." Talk about me. I'm in the U.S. military. I'm going to defend you, as you say, from the Cubans missiles. And then you say I can't eat there, but that was all right, because my officer, the white officer, said, "Don't worry about it. We'll bring you something out." So this is the history that we're talking about. And so this notion, I don't know if the Russians ever had to experience that before. I don't think Russians ever had to do the kind of stuff and be threatened as I was in Madison, Florida, with lynching for taking black people to register and vote, or in Alachua County, where I was taking black people to register and vote. I don't know if the Russians ever experienced that. And based on that, I don't see how the hell the Russians could be teaching me, leading me, around this issue. So it's ridiculous on its face.
I think this is one of the most...
They would negate my history. That's part of what it is. They would negate the history of black people in this country. And a part of it is negation of the history of the country itself. And this is part of what I mean in terms of, history. I mean, it can be unpleasant. But if we don't face it, if we don't look at it, we can never solve any real problems. That's one of the contradictions we're looking at right now in occupied Palestine. Look at the history. That's the thing about Ukraine and Russia. People can get misused. People die. We are facing a possible nuclear conflagration because of this falsified this story that they've invented about Ukraine, etc. It's ridiculous and it's dangerous. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad to have this discussion with you, and hopefully giving me access to people who I normally wouldn't be talking to.
I hope this is seen far and wide. So I'm grateful that you came on and talked to us, and Godspeed on your trial.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's insane, man. That is insane.
There you have it.
Congrats to Tucker for platforming Omali, and congrats to Omali for knocking it out of the park and giving a great interview that, again, the sort of audience he's probably not used to reaching hears him and considers him and his fight, their own fight, see an alignment between the fight that they're waging and the one that he's waging. So that's, I think, one of the most important things to see, that the people who the ruling class have told us are our enemies, are our neighbors, who have different ideas about the crisis and who identify in different political labels, when we're able to see the commonality of interest that we all have, that's central to what the communist does. The communist shows us the real essence of each different particular fight, the common component that the whole people share in that fight.
That is precisely what each of our jobs is as communists. When you go to someone, any working class person, and you ask them, what are you struggling with? You inform them, you explain how your struggle is my struggle. We're united in this, right? We are together. We have the same enemy. We have the same interests. Why? Why are we letting that enemy tell us that actually it's each other we should be fighting? Why? Why do we do that? We don't. Well, we don't. But I think this entire interview was great. I don't agree with everything either one of them said, but that doesn't matter. All of us could, even just watching, like, listen to what they're saying and go, yeah. You know, like, I don't cognize what's happening the way you do, but I'm here for it. I'm with you, right? We just put that whole thing out there, and even more people are going to see it. And that's the way we need to approach things. We got to get over this whole, they're not good enough. I disagree on that. Oh, they have a bad view on this. And then, you know, attack them for it. That shit's done. It's over. I feel like I repeat this all the time, but things are getting real. We can't afford to do that anymore. We just can't.
More than 2 million people heard Omali speak. 2 million on Twitter, 166,000 on YouTube, and God knows how many elsewhere. That is extremely positive, and for whatever his flaws are and his positions on China, etc., that has been a great service to the forces, the progressive forces today, the anti-imperialist forces. And even though it's not the I guess brand of communism that we are that we endorse, I guess that's a weird way to put it, but that we are, it's still a process of demystifying what the ruling elite have told the people that communism is, and showing them that even a communist like Omali, who is perhaps who's of its own specific type of communist that's perhaps a little less rooted in some of the traditions has certain interpretations that one would assume are a bit more disconnected from the American people. It's still, even in that case, very much clear to the people how there's a lot of points of unions there, and that they're essentially on the same side in their struggles.
Yeah, and on that note, that's it for the first half of our stream tonight. Just so you all know, I'm not sure if anyone's worried. You know, I'm an old man. I go to bed early. I drank like an entire pot of coffee, so we're gonna keep going. Was it last weekend, I think, right, Carlos, when we did the first part of Communist Manifesto? So that's what we're going to cover next. I think the Communist Manifesto is interesting because it's one of those things when you hear, you know, anti-communists, they'll say, well, I've read the manifesto, right? And the immediate sort of like scripted response is, well, it's not a theoretical text, blah, blah, blah. You know, like it's a political program for a specific group. I've said this myself. But that's sort of just the surface of it. What the Communist Manifesto really is an incredibly concise text that goes point by point by point. And no, doesn't explain it very well, but covers things very, very precisely. And we didn't actually get to as much as I wanted last time, but this time I really want to get into a few questions people always have, like when Marx is talking about all these different types of socialism. And it's funny because when the anti-communist says he's read the Communist Manifesto, and you say, well, what's your opinion on what he says on the conservative socialists or the reactionary socialists, right? They're like, what? That's a contradiction in terms. You can't be the conservative socialist. I'm like, well, he writes the words down. What do you think of them? And it's kind of like, you know, they were lying the whole time. But I want to get to that, where he's talking about all these different forms of socialist, and getting into really what the development of the proletariat means, because the way he puts it here is really, really, really good. But like last time, Carlos actually teaches a class on this, so he's going to sort of take the lead on this. I just want to interject at good times.
Yeah, I teach the first couple of chapters from the manifesto, and that was the occasion that brought us to discuss it in the first place, along with the fact that it was the anniversary last week of the death day of Karl Marx. But the second chapter, I mean, titles are always telling. The second chapter is Proletarian and Communist, which means that it's going to deal with the relationship of the communists to the working class. And one of the things you get from the beginning is that the communist has no interest that is separate from the working class. So when you look around at the state of American communism and you see certain middle class interests that are in direct, perhaps not antagonistic contradiction here and there, and in some other places perhaps in a contradiction that's a bit more antagonistic to the working class. If you're running a communist organization that working people are afraid to bring their coworkers to because they know that it'll feel like an HR department meeting, they know that the culture does not resemble the one that they have as working people, you are doing something wrong with your organization. The problem is not the working class. You can't pull a better, purer, more enlightened working class from a void. What you have to do as a communist is be with the people, be of the people, and educate the people through a process of understanding them, of being rooted in them, not coming down to them as if you're some great priest that is ready to save their souls. No, go down to them because you realize that you learn from them, first of all, and on the basis of learning from them, you have this dialectical and referential relationship to them that allows you to lead them, that allows you to help them come to see the world in the way that represents their interest best.
Yeah, and this confuses a lot of people because of a lot of the distortions that built up over the last period of history. You're going to hear me specifically talk about this constantly, especially until the next Journal of American Socialist Studies comes out, where my paper against the fake left will be published. But we're in this period now of needing to clarify basic things. And one of those basic things is what class itself is. Because here's the thing. I've been in these organizations and I've been asked, Noah, why don't you ever bring your coworkers? You keep telling us how all of them are on board for communism. Why? Why don't you bring them here? And I never get to tell them why, because the answer is I'm embarrassed of you guys, right? I don't know how else to put it. You guys are all middle class, running around talking about how you're the proletariat, and you're just not. Right? So we need to go over and clarify what the proletariat even is, because I'm sorry, it is not college kids. It's just not. All right? It's not, the PMC, right? It's not. The proletariat is that class which arises because the means of production advanced to a point where they were outmoding the old feudal relations of production, right? So the old ways of doing things, Marx says that this makes everything solid turn into air, right? And these people have nowhere else to go. They get crowded into industrial factories during a period where generalized commodity production is sort of coming into being, and they get proletarianized, right? And Reclaim says it's not college teachers either. Absolutely correct. So what happens during the period of commodity production, and why Marx even begins Capital with the commodity, right, is that society begins reproducing itself based on this logic. Humans begin interacting based on the logic of capital, based on the MCM circuit, or the money, commodities, money circuit, the accumulation of capital. Production is privatized, or I'm sorry, production is socialized, while the proceeds of it are privatized. And this creates the class that needs to carry it out, the proletariat. And so in general, and I don't want to like go on a long rant because this is a big side note, the proletariat are those people imbuing these commodities with value. This is an integral part of the process, right? And it's needed. We sort of enter this relation independent of our wills, and it creates who we are and how we reproduce all of our social relations that come out of that. So no, it's not, all these other things. That is what the proletariat in general is. And if we are talking about, like Marx is, the communist being within this working class, the most advanced section of it, then we need to understand what that is first, because all these college kids running around, some having gotten into, all these organizations and leadership positions because they were the only people who were doing it during the period of the middle classes, the last period. They have to, well, they don't have to, they're not understanding how it's them keeping the proletariat away, and not understanding even what that proletariat is part of it.
Absolutely. No, some folks are joking about it. I understand I'm not proletarian. I'm not going around calling myself a proletarian.
We can't really get into the reproletariat now, but another time.
That's the classification that I consider myself under. I've been proletarianized in terms of material conditions, but in terms of social consciousness, I've done my absolute best to sustain it within a proletarian working class interest. And that is the sort of interest that I come out of, the communities I was raised in. But that's neither here nor there. There's two things that Marx and Engels are specific in the manifesto that are central to what the communist brings to the workers' movement. One, they sustain in the struggles that working class people wage a clear view of the international dimension of the struggle, which for today, it would mean keeping an eye on imperialism, showing in every instance where we see these manifestations of the imperialist system depicted, and the attacks on the people of Palestine, the attacks on the Russian people, the attacks on the Chinese, on the people of Iran, on the people of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, etc., showing to the working class struggle here at home how it is in their interest to stand with the people fighting back against imperialism. How if they win, we win as a working class. If they lose, we lose. They're both fighting against the same capitalist imperialist elite, the same elite that goes over there to other countries, bombs them, murders children, overthrows government, installs puppet dictatorships. That same elite is the one keeping us poor, wretched, alienated, drugged up, sick, indebted here at home. So it is the same fight that we are on, and that's one of the central things that the communist brings to the working class movement, along with the fact that winning a few extra benefits, winning a pay raise, winning small reforms and crumbs, concessions from the ruling class is not enough. There's a ultimate interest that the working class has, and that ultimate interest is what history has placed it on this planet for, which is to emancipate humanity as a whole through the process of conquering political power and establishing a working class dictatorship, bringing us from the realm of necessity ultimately to the conditions that will eventually give us the realm of genuine freedom. So keeping both the international dimension in mind, in sight, and keeping the ultimate long-term goal of the working class movement, that being the conquest of political power, the abolition of the bourgeois state and establishment of a working class state in its place, Those are the two central things that communists bring to the working class movement.
Yeah, and I mean that's perfectly said, brother. And I hate having to always clear up these distortions, but this is another one that all of the distortions that piled up on us over that last period gets wrong. They don't understand what proletarian internationalism means. They believe it means we must subjugate our national interests as the American working class to some other nation's working class, right? It's that submissiveness that I was talking about earlier, all the hip bourgeois theory that masquerades as somehow revolutionary or left or communist or whatever, wants us in that position. Or they confuse it for a sort of what used to be called rootless cosmopolitanism, what the old ultra lefts of Lenin's day did, which was a reactionary sort of view that brought us back to liberal universalism. They mistake Marx's famous line in this very book that the proletariat has no nation for meaning that nations are not real. What he's doing instead is talking about in the universal sense. There is a proletariat everywhere. Because on the next page, he also says that every class struggle must at first be national in form. And that's the period we're in, these national struggles. So that doesn't mean you aren't American or, Indian or Mexican or whatever country you're from. It means that you are part of the proletariat that arises in each of these nations, right? That all of our interests in general align. Not that you should subjugate your interest to someone else, or that, you're just this sort of airy-fairy universal person that has no grounding, no material reality or community that created who you are.
That's very eloquently stated, brother. And central to the conception that Marx and Engels hold for what communists are is the fact that they are thinking about communists not as this external force to the working class, but as the most advanced detachment of the working class, to employ a term that Stalin would later use. The communists are those that have the framework, the most advanced worldview, that being Marxism, although, of course, Marx and Engels are not calling it Marxism. A framework that allows them to understand the systematic character of the specific ills that working class people face, and that the ruling class promotes them understanding those ills as individual failures at times. Instead of seeing those as individual failures or individual issues, to see those as produced by the system that necessarily has to produce these sorts of outcome for the working people upon whose exploitation it is based on. So Marxism brings to the working class movement something that's not spontaneously there, which is an awareness of the system, a coherent worldview that can understand it, and on that basis, of course, not just understand it for the sake of just knowing things, but change it, understand how to go about changing it, and how it is in their power as a class to produce a new world, and how out of the own contradictions of the capitalist system, that world is already found in embryo, that world is already developing as we currently speak.
Yeah, I mean, that's I couldn't put that any better myself. The thesis on Feuerbach is something that people often misunderstand, right? The 11th one, Marx writes this list, and it was supposed to be a paper later on. This is sort of his notes to himself, but Engels finds these notes and he publishes it. And the 11th one is that the philosophers have hitherto only sought to understand the world, but the point is to change it. If you're just understanding, what are you doing? Pops, my dad, everybody used to call him Pops. He used to say that practice without theory is pointless. Theory without practice is a book club.
based superseded Stalin's practice without theory is blind, and theory without practice is empty.
Mm.
One of the things that Marx
probably-
and Engels, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying he probably was knowingly ripping off Stalin. Stalin was a big deal in my house. little bit of a big deal.
The one of the central things that distinguishes, of course, Marxist socialism from the previous kinds, although we're not going to get that deep into the third chapter of the manifesto that deals with the other forms of so-called socialism, is its utopian versus scientific character. Marxian socialism is rooted in a scientific analysis, not only of the capitalist mode of life and capitalist political economy, that allows us to have a comprehensive understanding, a concrete understanding of the form of life we exist under, but also a scientific understanding of history itself that gives us insights into the laws of motion of human society, into the development and undevelopment of forms of life that will go on to give way to new forms of life, and how with that historical science we can understand, in conjunction with a concrete understanding of capitalist political economy, how socialism is a concrete possibility, something that is not the product of lofty ideals of enlightened individuals, as was the case with the utopians, but an objective fact of the world, a fact that we have in our minds and can develop only because and only on the basis of the fact that it is already within the world itself. The fact that we can describe socialism in the ways in which we are and study it scientifically, study the system that will give rise to it scientifically, is not because Marx and Engels are these enlightened individuals far above and transcending all other human beings. It's simply because they're the ones that have been able to study to the best of their capacity at that time the actual world. So socialism becomes not this abstract idea, but this concrete reality that on the basis of an analysis of our society is realizable.
And this is a theme you'll see throughout all of Marxism, that all of us are limited by our own epoch, right? Our own era in history. One of the big questions that people have been asking, since 1917 is, why hasn't the US had a proletarian revolution yet? I mean, this is setting aside Reconstruction, obviously. One of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons we haven't been able to really get a concrete answer everyone can agree on yet, that I like to think the Institute can contribute a little bit to with the theory of reproletarianization, is that we were experiencing what was preventing it. It hadn't developed to a point yet where we could step back and say that happened and now we can understand it. What the theory of reproletarianization is the theory of the rising of a new type of middle class, and then its decline and fall. And now that it's declining and falling, we can see what it was clearly. While it was rising, we couldn't. It was impossible. We just weren't there yet. And so now we can answer that question: why hasn't the US had a communist revolution? And that's what we attempt to do.
By the way, just to respond to Reclaim, this is titled Utopian or Scientific because we're covering the section of chapter 2 that deals with the historical materialist conception of history. And this is a PowerPoint that was made for my students. We weren't covering chapter 3, so it gave me an opportunity to discuss the difference between a utopian and Marxist understanding of socialism. On the abolition of private property, which is perhaps the most surprising section for anyone that actually reads it closely and without bourgeois prejudices. This is the one where my students had the most, wow, really? Is that actually what it says? Sections. Communists aim to abolish private property. But what private property means for Marx and Engels is not necessarily your toothbrush, which they label like personal property. It's not even the small property that you have in your hands after you do a certain amount of work. They call that self-earned private property. When they use the term private property, they are describing within the framework of legality capital, and specifically capital, how it functions under the capitalist system and the supremacy that it holds and its ability to make everything else subject to the ultimate aims of its own reproduction and accumulation. So they're referring to this form of property whose distinctive characteristic is not only the form that exploitation takes, but the fact that there has to be more and more and more of it in order for it to survive. Any economy in the world today that doesn't grow to at least 2 to 3% is seen to be in crisis. That is not accidental. That is rooted in the fact that capital, for its own very survival, has to accumulate, and that takes supremacy over all other considerations. That is what Marx and Engels are referring to. They're referring to the means of production, as Sean Moon here suggests, and the distinctive relations that arise out of that. So they're not talking about all property in general. They're aiming to abolish the supremacy of capital over production, consumption, the state, etc.
Yeah, two of my very favorite quotes from Marx to sort of to explain to conservatives, MAGA people, libertarians, etc., are on this question right here. And we brought them up last week, but I want to bring them up again because they're incredibly important and they're so to the point and perfect. He says, we communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as a fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. That sounds like how a libertarian looks at it, right? He goes on, though. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property? Do you mean the property of the petty artisan or small business or whatever, and of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form or the form he's actually discussing? He says there is no need to abolish that. The development of the industry has to a great extent already destroyed it and is still destroying it daily. Or do you mean the modern bourgeois private property? Wage labor, but does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital. And like Carlos was saying, he's speaking of capital. And that's important. And there's one more, and I'll go over it real quick. He says, you are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You approach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend.
Excellent. That's no, you're absolutely right. And every time I cover this quote in class, it leads a lot of people stunned because the assumptions is that communists want to come after either your personal property or your self-earned private property, and that couldn't be any farther from the truth. So let's see here. I think we've already discussed most of what's in this page. One of the things that is also clear is that when capital is abolished, that property doesn't just like disappear. It gets turned into a social product. So something that is already social in character, the means of production, It's been socialized and centralized more and more by the development of capital itself. That property as property in general doesn't disappear. It just turns into social property. It turns into the direct appropriation of the producers, which is another important component, because what the bourgeoisie does is speak of its own type of property as property in general. So for the mass of people who are property-less, the abolition of private property in the form of capital, i.e. the property of the big monopolist capitalists, means they have more property. So in the form of property that we can actually enjoy as a people, the abolition of private property in the communist Marxist sense means that we, the people, have more property for the social purposes, not just for the purpose of being accumulated in the hands of those who own.
Yeah, and it always strikes me as funny that they sort of say, like, well, we all have the right to this private property, right? But in reality, is that actually achievable? This form of property that we're speaking about requires, as it exists, requires far more people to not own it than do. And so what people are saying when they want people to have this right is they want people to have the right to be a leech, to be a parasite, right? And they act like it's this wonderful thing, but even if this right were something that we agree on, right, that it should be a thing, it's like let's say a fish telling you that you have the right to breathe underwater. That's fine, like in theory, but in practice, in actual reality, can it happen? And we have numbers on this. The amount of businesses that fail, right? The more capital one begins with, the less chance there is for failure. And that includes the wild speculation of right now. The wild speculation. Because they don't actually fail. There's loopholes upon loopholes for everything. There's bailouts upon bailouts. Finance is in power and destroys everything else.
In essence, it's what society produces already for society. Instead of it being under the control and dominance and dictatorship of a specific class of owners, of a small class of owners, that property will go from being private for the capitalists to being public, to having the things that society produces actually serve society, to have a society that serves society. And that creates a condition where instead of having capital, this accumulation of dead labor, dominate and function as a power over and above living labor, actual workers working, you have the inversion. What you have is the accumulation of dead labor, the things that we have produced as humanity, being used as means to advancing the interest of living labor, of actual working class people. Wanted to answer a question real quick from Michael McKinley. How does this continual need for growth of capitalism, of accumulation, relate to the degrowth communism Koi Saito claims to have advocated by the later Marx? There's no degrowth communism in the later Marx. I think Saito is definitely wrong there. What there is an understanding that the forces of production, when we argue that, and we will discuss that in a little bit, that capitalist relations of productions present a fetter to the forces of production, that doesn't mean that when socialism comes around, working people have the capacity to just produce more stuff. Capitalism is at the same time also a system of waste. There's a lot of things that people need that are actively being thrown out and wasted and disposed of unnecessarily. What it means is that the fetters that are put on the development of certain things, so think of different forms of medical research that are not more invested in simply because they can't reap as much profit as something else. Those artificial limitations that are created to the development of the productive forces, to human development, all of those will be removed. So it means producing more efficiently. In some areas in the global north, that means that we can roll back how much we produce. In other areas, it means we have to produce more. The US has crumbling infrastructure. We virtually have no public transportation, at least none that can call itself a part of the 21st century like China's has. So we need growth here in the US. Now, we don't need growth in the clothing industry, where we throw away something like 70% of the clothes that are produced. We don't even need growth in the area of food, because we dispose of almost half of the food that we have, but we need growth in other sectors. So instead of either degrowth or capitalist cancer growth, the correct way to think about the question of growth under socialism is growth that is centered on a human conception, that is anthropocentric, human-centered understanding of growth. Growth understood as creating the material conditions for the greatest amount of human flourishing, not the material conditions for the greatest amount of stuff. In the same passages where Engels criticizes in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, how the relations of production under capitalism limit the productive forces, he goes on to say right after, but we're also not talking about just making a bunch of senseless bullshit. So the correct term, I think, is sustainable development, having an ecological civilization, socialist civilization, which is what is inscribed in the Constitution of China, the notion that the Communist Party of China has developed, which means that we will have as people the amount of things that are absolutely indispensable to be the best sorts of human beings that we can be, to live up to the ultimate human potential. So that's, I guess, how I would describe that question. I'm not in favor, and we're not in favor of degrowth. There's many areas that we need sustainable growth, but growth nonetheless. And I'm also not ready to accept, as Lula suggested last year in major conferences, the form of imperialist environmentalism, which is often suggested by the global north, which condemns the global south for growing when it has to grow simply because it uses things that lead to some detrimental environmental effects. I say global south develop by any means necessary, and humanity will deal with what it needs to deal with when we have working people conquer political power, which, if you're an environmentalist and someone who cares about the environment, is the most important thing. Realizing that it's the system that produces this, not people in general.
Yeah, a lot of this, the arguments for degrowth are based on a metaphysical way of understanding the world, where they can't understand that yes, our global resources are limited, but the ways we have of interacting with them are infinite. It's only limited by our ability to understand and manipulate nature or technology. In the 70s, they were saying that we would deplete all of the world's oil reserves by the year 2000. It's now 2023. No one's talking about depleting oil reserves. Why? It's not like their math was wrong. It's because science developed. We developed more efficient ways of burning oil for energy. And this is the basic understanding that Marx has, right? Back in Theories of Surplus Value, when he's criticizing Robert Malthus, or is it Thomas Malthus? I forget which one. Someone corrected me. Yeah, it's 2020.
Robert Thomas Malthus. It's
It's both. It's Robert Thomas Malthus, right? That was saying, the problem is that we're getting too populist, we're blah 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 resources, and Marx corrects him on this, right? Because the important thing is that these productive forces continue developing, and we continue getting better at what we're doing. All of society is based around this. We even become human, thinking, cognizant, laboring humans because of our ability to manipulate labor or nature using labor.
That's beautifully said. And just like the capitalist class uses the concept of property in order to property in general, in order to speak about their distinctive type of property as capital, so too do they use concepts of freedom and democracy and individuality, and then proclaim that what the communists want with their demands is to abolish freedom, to abolish democracy, to abolish individuality. And the question that Marx asks is, and Marx and Engels, is that actually what's being abolished, or is it the form, the distinctively capitalist form that these take in the capitalist parasitic form of life that's actually being abolished? Where is the freedom of people? Where is their ability to express a form of individuality, to develop as full human beings in conjunction with community? Where is actual democracy under the capitalist mode of life? It's inexistent. It's very clear that the freedom, the individuality, the democracy that they speak of is rooted in their notion of their right to exploit, to oppress, to loot. It is, in other words, freedom, individuality, democracy for them, which is embedded in the absence, in the nullity, in the negation of freedom, democracy, and individuality for the vast majority of people who are stifled and enslaved by this system.
And Lenin, he asks a very important question on this. He says, freedom for whom? To do what?
Yep.
When it becomes real, when we speak of something other than some airy-fairy idea, it's always freedom for a certain class. Always. And their freedom specifically comes at our expense. It's their freedom to leech off of us. That's all it's ever been.
Absolutely. That's very well said. You already read this quote earlier, but the same thing we had discussed with property, with freedom, democracy, individuality, all of these are abstract universals. They must be concretized to actually be understood. And when you concretize them, you realize that the abstract character with which the ruling class formulates that is hiding, concealing a concrete content, which is the fact that it's a class-based understanding of freedom, democracy, property, individuality, etc., that they're operating with. In this chapter, go ahead, Noah. You had a question or a comment?
No,
Sorry.
I didn't. Before we get onto this section, though, I want to say something very important, that Google AdSense has demonetized us without telling us why. That means that's why we're not answering any super chats, because we can't get them. So if you're watching this and you can help, please do. This is a completely people-funded institute. You can help us out at patreon.com/MidwesternMorks. The PayPal link should be in the pinned chat. I'm sure Carlos will be posting it in the chat again right now, but just take a minute, do that. And while you're at it, like and share the stream. That's immensely important. We're breaking viewer records left and right these days. We're not sure exactly what's happening, but maybe some, automatic throttle got removed. I don't know. But we're here for it. So, let's keep bumping up in the algorithm. every like, every share matters. It matters, matters, matters. Take a second, do it.
Absolutely, it's indispensable. I know everyone doesn't have the means to contribute financially, but everyone that has an account can like or retweet and serve the cause of spreading this information. If you watch it, that means you probably find some value in it. So it's only going to be able to realize that value if more people listen to it, not just the ones watching. If we can turn 1,100 into 11,000 and 11,000 into 111,000 and just keep it going from there.
American communism's on the come up in a big way, y'all. We ain't stopping. This is just the beginning.
One of the very interesting things that Marx and Engels do in this chapter is start basically debunking some of the myths that the bourgeoisie was already creating about communism, many of which are unfortunately very much still around. One of them here is that communism means that universal laziness will be imposed. One of the common variations that this takes today is that only capitalism creates the sorts of conditions that promote innovation. Now, in Marx's and Engels' time, they couldn't do what we can today, which is look at the country that developed the quickest in human history without a genocide or an enslavement of a whole people. What country was that? Oh, it was the Soviet Union under Stalin and collectivization. Okay, well, what country surpassed it after that? What was that? It was China in the first period from 49 to 78 in the Cultural Revolution period and the period that came before it. Oh, okay, what happened in that time? Oh, people went in a span of 29 years. They increased 32 years in their life expectancy. It's unheard of in all of human history. And then what was the example after that that surpassed that? Oh, it's been the post-reform and opening up era in China that has literally created today a world that looks like it's out of a science fiction novel. It looks like you stepped in 100 to 200 years into the future for the average American, that one sees maybe a railroad every once in a while, doesn't have the public transportation system in terms of quantity as many as China does, but what they see are railroads from 2 centuries ago. What China has produced are railroads that go at the speed of planes, that get you from one part of China to the other in the time that it would take a plane to do so. So they've stepped into the future. That's what communism has been able to do. That's the so when we're talking about communism bringing about universal laziness or stifling development and innovation, it's quite the contrary. It's on the basis of capitalism stifling innovation. It's on the basis of capitalism producing a parasitic class of people who accumulate on the basis of doing nothing, on the basis of being leeches. That is one of the central contradictions of the system, one of the central ways that the relations of production show themselves to be a fetter for the development of the forces of production, not just material production, but intellectual production, cultural production, civilizational production. And it is precisely because communism is the opposite of laziness. It is precisely because communism is the only system that allows us as a humanity to be as great as we can be, to be as creative and productive as we can be. It is precisely because of those reasons that communism can already be seen within the capitalist mode of life itself to be a distinctive reality to be achieved.
Yeah, this is another one of those. It's just topsy-turvy. How do we let these fat, lazy parasites that leech off us for everything they get, we create? Remember that. We're the ones who work, not them. And they tell us we're the lazy ones when they haven't worked a single day in their lives. And they're like, but those communists, they're lazy. They want handouts. No, we're sick of giving you the handouts. And that shit's coming to an end. You're going to have to deal with that.
Same thing with culture. The bourgeoisie already at that time said that communism means the abolition of culture. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. It is true that there are some points of commonality with bourgeois culture and the other cultures of history, simply because written history has been the written history of class societies. And in those class societies, the ideas that have triumphed have all been the ideas of the ruling, owning class. And there's almost a homologous relationship that exists in each era between the owners and the producers, and the owners and the producers, and then the ideas of the owners that end up being dominant throughout society. So there's some points of commonality that they can look back and say, oh, this is culture. Well, yes, communism will have a radically new culture to the societies that produced a culture aimed at reproducing the forms of property hierarchies between those who own and those who are forced to work and own nothing, to own nothing and be happy, as the World Economic Forum wants us to be. But that doesn't mean that we're not drawing from history. We're not abolishing completely the history of humanity and then creating something new. That would be anathema to the Marxist worldview that sees that there's no change that doesn't at the same time preserve something from the past. And if we go to a phrase that will arise later on in Lenin's speech to the communist youth, the goal of the communists is to breathe in, to take in the wealth, the richness of intellectual production of previous modes of life, not just to remember the works of Marx and Engels and communist slogans, to remember the best intellectual production that humanity has produced in general. So it'll be a more...
just real quick, he calls it all the treasures of mankind.
That's the word I was looking for. To take in the treasures of mankind. So it's a culture that is actually culture for the mass of people, that if we take what culture means, the etymology of it, to cultivate the mind, to cultivate the people's spirit, that has the capacity to do much more of that than any other previous form of life. A culture that is itself more acculturated than any other previous form of culture.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that. Perfectly said, brother.
The same thing with the family. This might be a sticky one.
We're gonna get canceled again. No, we don't want to abolish your family.
We want to abolish the condition that under the mode of life of capitalism, the family is forced to be under, which is a condition where the family is reduced to an economic unit, where the woman is reduced to playing the social role of just reproducing human beings that can function as wage slaves for the capitalists and that are degraded as people. We want to abolish a condition where, you know, like you have in the US, how many partners, the divorce percentage is, it's about half of marriages end up in divorce. Families are already crumbling. So it's hard to make the argument that capitalism hasn't already, to a certain extent, especially in the US, abolished the traditional family unit. But how many women are stuck in marriages they don't want to be in, abusive marriages, because of the benefits that they obtain because of the employment of the husband? There's hundreds and thousands of cases like that. So the point is not abolish the family in general, in total. The point is abolish the conditions rooted in capital and the universal commodification of everything in society under which the family exists in the bourgeois mode of life. To have an actual family that's rooted in just love and not this hypocrisy where on one end, through one cheek, the bourgeoisie proclaims monogamy and all these familial values, and then on the other end, the man specifically goes around and sleeps with a million other women, and that's almost admired. The conclusion of Engels is the origins of the family, private property, and the state. It's not the re-embracing of the polygamy of original societies, but the actual establishment of a real monogamy and a real familial relation that's based only on love, not on property, not on any other means or status or anything like that, only on love, and enforcing monogamy on both sides, not the hypocrisy that upholds monogamy through one side and then allows men allows boys to be boys, as it's often phrased.
Yeah, and it also sort of moves into the proletarian extended family, right? This is very, very important as sort of we free ourselves of this economic necessity of becoming this singular unit cut off, right? That it extends into, you know, all of your brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles, etc., and second cousins, and on and on and on, all as a bigger unit, right? And I also want to bring up something else that Engels said. This one, I think it was in Utopian and Scientific, where he talks about that capitalism saw an increase in prostitution like the world had never seen before. And you got to understand how that affects the family, right? And its stuntedness. You also got to understand where he says in the same section that the right of what they used to call prima nocta, that the Lord would get to sleep with a bride on their wedding night, was not done away with, but instead transferred to the bourgeois, right? Where because of this economic necessity, this becomes a thing. And they start talking about how, I forget the term, it's starting to get late, but people are cheating left and right. And that's what we have nowadays, right? And all of these more hedonistic impulses that the left sort of embraces a lot of the time, right? This is not to say we're like blaming the leftists for this, but that it's an expression of modern alienation and trying to find something more than this, right? And I don't want to get into a whole thing. We're on the manifesto.
What? Oh, go ahead. No, finish.
No, it's fine. I like I said, I don't want to get into a whole thing.
No. I think that is a discussion within the manifesto. What is alienation? Alienation is when something that is integral to something else, something that's naturally conjoined with that other thing, when one of those components becomes an alien, a hostile force to the other. The classic example is the fruit of our labor or the process of production becoming a hostile force over and against ourselves as working people. The alienation of the product, the process of production, and then Marx lays out nature, the alienation of our Gattungswesen and from other humanity at large, other men. So alienation is this process of separation. Well, what does crisis mean? You trace crisis back etymologically, it also means a process of separation. So alienation is a crisis. And what we have today is a crisis in the family.
By the way, real quick, let me add one more thing. What does abstract mean? What's the etymology of that word?
Disconnecting. Yeah. Taking things in a disconnected manner, a reified manner. So we have a crisis of the family. That means that something which should be conjoined is constantly being separated. And the clearest indicator of that are, I think, the divorce rates in the US. Families are not lasting together. There has been a destruction of familial relationships, which is the basic unit of society. And this isn't bourgeois theorists saying it. This is Chinese communists and communists from other countries, Soviet communists, understanding that the family is the basic, if you want to get metaphysical, the monad of society, the basic component, the atom of society. So it's what we have is a crisis in the family because we're seeing these constant splits. And what are the splits rooted in? They're primarily rooted in one, the development of a culture that is very antisocial, very alienating, very me, and narcissistic. And two, in other contexts, because of the stress, the economic stress that's imposed on families that tears people apart, that leads people to getting tired from each other, not because they're actually tired or stop loving the other person, but because of the economic stress that's bearing down on them that is unlivable. It doesn't let people breathe. So capitalism it's impossible to have values that uphold family values. It's impossible to have those within the capitalist mode of life that
as Marx said, turns all that is solid into air. It dissolves everything. And what we're seeing is the dissolving of the family values. And it's very scary, I think.
Yeah, I mean, oh God, what was I about to say? Oh, there's a reason that money is the number one reason for arguments in relationships and divorce, right? And this is something that a few of the sort of anti-left, conservative talking heads try to paint in like either a racist tone or just like a dumb one, where they blame this sort of breakdown on absent fathers, right? Divorced families. But what they do is they leave it there without even trying to understand what's happening, as if these people are just wandering off, right? Like they decide one day, I don't want to be married, as if this isn't an expression of some deeper issue and crisis going on in our country. Millions upon millions upon millions of people. I mean, we're a country of 350 million people, and half the marriages end in divorce. There is something deeper than people just, not wanting to be married anymore or not being responsible. There's something going on, and they leave us without a reason for it. And that's because of their ideological baggage, right? They're individualists. They can't see this as a social question rather than a question of individuals. And then they place blame. Or they, do the racist thing where they blame black fathers, which is ridiculous because there's just as many white divorces as black. But that's like, that exactly what Reclaim was just saying.
So, if you want to be provocational, tell the conservative that you don't support them because they're not conservative enough. You don't support family values enough. We, the communists, we're the ones that actually uphold those, because we want to create a society where families can thrive.
Damn straight.
So, but I mean, some of these comments that Marx and Engels are replying to, wife sharing. I mean, it's just the utmost hypocrisy that the system that completely explodes prostitution is accusing communists of wife sharing. The system that has reduced the family to an economic unit that has degraded women unlike any other system before is accusing the communists who want to uphold women as workers, as people, to aiming to just make them prostitutes for everyone, to have a community of women, as they would phrase it. Here's another frequently misunderstood quote. Working people have no country. Well, if you read this outside of its context, you would think of Marx as a rootless cosmopolitan, as the Soviets used to call it, someone who is rooted in this sort of petit bourgeois nihilism to national past. But that's not at all what Marx is saying. Marx is not saying that in reality, working people are just, they don't have any country and they're really human beings, and there's just one part of this one big race that's the same, and doesn't take different particular forms in different nations. No, what Marx is saying is concretely, working people literally have no country. There's no country where working people are in power. In 1847/48, when it's written and then published, when this document is written and then published, there is no dictatorship of the proletariat anywhere. That means there is no there's no country for working people. Working people have no country because there's no country in which they've won power. That doesn't mean that you reject the sense of you having a country and fighting for your country and taking power for your people and embracing this form of working class patriotism that's rooted not in the super patriotism and the shallow flag waving patriotism of the elite, but in the fact that you love your people, and the fact that you love your country, i.e. your people, and your the rational parts, pro-people parts of your traditions, and you want that to be upheld. And all that is socialism. And that's not antagonistic to loving humanity at large. It's not antagonistic to wanting the same well-being for other people around the world. It's the form that wanting that for other people around the world has to take. If you cannot love your own people, you cannot love humanity at large. You have to love your own people in order to love humanity at large.
Absolutely. And this is one that the ruling class has recently been very much trying to push. They want us nihilistic about the history of our own country. They want us divorced from it to believe that we are some universal subject, the liberal subject that is not really. I'm not American. America is bad. That's wrong, just objectively. All right. This country is ours. It's what produced you. And if you think Marx was saying that it doesn't exist, you haven't read very much Marx. All right. So don't run around the internet talking about how America bad, blah, blah, blah. All you're doing at that point is the ruling class's job for it. Instead, embrace your people. The real people as they are, not some vague notion of a proletariat, right? The real proletariat as it is formed, is characterized, is given its concrete particularity by everything around you. And if you're in the U.S., that means the U.S. That means they grow up listening to hip hop or country and Western or punk rock or whatever it is, these American art forms, right? They grow up eating hamburgers and all of that. That's all part of it, right?
Hot
and
dogs.
What was that?
Hot dogs.
Exactly. And it's this unique thing where this country of all these disparate types of people, right, coming together that create one thing that is greater than the sum of its parts. The only country in the world where you can go, oh, what's your background? In a room of 10 people and get 30 different answers. Right? Carlos is American. He's also Cuban. I'm American. I'm also Georgian and Kazakh and Irish. Right? Eddie's American. I think he's German and Irish. Right? I don't even know Danny's. But you see what I'm saying? This.
Danny's a cosmopolitan coastal elite. We have this ongoing joke, folks. When Danny came out to the Midwest, we were busting his balls, calling him a cosmopolitan coastal elite. And he's from Bronx. He grew up poor like all of us, so it's all fun and games. But it's a great inside joke that we've kept going for a month now. I'm sorry to ruin your train of thought.
I'm not.
But the most important book I think you can read if you're an American communist with regard to this question, because you obviously have to hate empire. And it's very easy to translate that hate of empire to just a notion of socialism that's abolish America, abolish the U.S., hate America.
It doesn't have a class analysis to it.
It doesn't have a class. The most important book I think you should check out is Michael Parenti's Super Patriotism, where he distinguishes between the sort of patriotism that we have come to think about as patriotism, the patriotism of the ruling class. My country's always right, even when it's wrong. America's number one. That sort of patriotism is baseless, it's empty, it's abstract. A concrete patriotism rooted on the love of the people, love of the country, and also the love of everyone else, right? In conjunction, a complementary relationship to that. It's solely rooted on the work.
It's all it is a difference between materialist analysis and definition mongering.
Yeah. So read that book if you haven't. It's extremely short. It's maybe 100 pages long. Super Patriotism, or Patriotism and Super Patriotism. I can't remember the actual title.
I think it's just Super Patriotism.
Yeah, that's what I believe so. I also have a section in the Purity Fetish on national nihilism and the threat that it brings, and why it is that it is absolutely essential not just to be right about the contradictory history of the U.S. that has formed it as the U.S., the history that has equally imperialism, genocide, slavery, exploitation, equally with struggle against all of that, but that's more accurately defined by that thread of struggle, which is moving us forward. And we have to connect ourselves with to give our movement historical legs. When we fight, it's not just to change the present, it's not just to create a new future, it's to also rewrite the past, to not let the voices that died, that spent their whole lives fighting for this struggle for humanity, to not let those voices die in vain, to pick up their struggles and recognize that we're part of the same lineage, and that in order for us to succeed now, we have to be capable of giving this lineage, this movement, a particular determination, to give the content of socialism a particular national form, as was customary of being said by the Comintern, which urged that the most important thing we can do in the struggle against fascism is not let the fascists take the progressive symbols of our country away from us. When they do that, they're conquering the memory of the people. We have to take those symbols, take the rational kernels there, and re-articulate them to socialism, because that means working on the basis of our people's common sense, sensibilities, and outlooks, and taking what is there that we can use and to move them towards socialism, which is the only way you can convince people. And convincing is the name of the game. Convincing is what we have to do. And you can't convince people if there's no point of commonality.
100%. We just got a great, wrong one. Sorry. We just got a great question from Michael McKinley, who asked, wasn't the most important problem with Stalin the idea of socialism one country rather than international socialism? The major difference with Lenin and Trotsky. So this is precisely what we were just talking about, in fact. Stalin, and Lacerdo talks about this in his book on him. Stalin was the most in-depth theorist on the national question of that era. Trotsky and other ultra-lefts of the day were going backwards to a very reactionary idea of the liberal universal subject that is not rooted in any national reality. But if you're applying a dialectical view of the development of society, it must include the bourgeois nation state, which gives rise to the proletariat. That means that the proletariat has a nation that creates it, right? That, as Marx says in the manifesto, each class struggle is, of course, at first national in form. Its content is always universal, but what Trotsky's doing in his permanent revolution theory is saying that society overall, right, must be led by the most developed countries, right? That they must force revolution onto those countries where it has not yet reached a point where it is possible. And this is an issue because he's seeing it not the way Stalin does, as actual genuine internationalism, and therefore socialism in one country is just, the first country building socialism, which is basically what Lenin was talking about. He actually called Trotsky's permanent revolution Hapa-Menshevik theory for its stagism, right? Its notion that the bourgeoisie needs to do their historic mission and create the right possibility for socialism. But what Stalin is proving with the theory at this point, before the real world and the experience of the Soviets proves it, is that internationalism is not the erasure of our nations and our countries that give rise to us, to that. The proletariat sort of intuitively understands it, right? If you go to France, right, and you're working in a factory there, every other worker there is going to go, oh, there's the American. No theory needed. They understand that. We understand that. But Trotsky's saying none of that matters, right? Stalin instead is saying all of these different countries, these different proletariats have their own process, and the process of socialism in one country is not a negation of internationalism, but instead the only way to fulfill internationalism. Mao speaks about this in the terms of patriotism. He says that can a proletarian who is an internationalist at the same time be a patriot? We hold that not only can he be, but he must be. That the specific content of his patriotism is based in the national reality that creates it, right? So in China, the patriotic move was kicking out the Japanese, right? And in the American context, he doesn't use America. He uses Germany actually in defeating Hitler and Nazism, as that would be patriotic for them, right? But in the American context at the time, what would be patriotic? It would be the position that would lead us into the future, the struggle against the color line and Jim Crow, right? And then we get, I don't want to get on a whole thing. We're nearing the end here. But yeah, that's basically the socialism in one country thing.
The second to last thing that I want to talk about here from the second chapter of the manifesto is, of course, the historical materialist view of ideas. And I want to do it in the form of a quote. Marx and Engels write, "Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conception, in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations and his social life? What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ruling ideas of the ideas of the ruling class." That is the essence of the materialist, dialectical materialist understanding of the ideal, of the history of ideas. Ideas are not disconnected in a transcendental separate realm of their own. Ideas are conditioned, produced by the horizon of the mode of life in which they exist in. The ideas that we are discussing today would have been impossible to have discussed 500-600 years ago in the US. Would have been impossible to have discussed these ideas 500-600 years ago in England. Would have been impossible to discuss these ideas in the Middle Ages or in ancient Greece. Why? Because it was the development of material life, of the forms of intercourse, of the means of production. It was those concrete developments in the economic base of society that created the conditions for the forms of ideas, for the forms of judicature, for the forms of art and philosophy and religion, for the forms of everything else that is produced as a reflection of the economic base of society, that being the relations of production and the means of production. So there's this famous little superstructure thing, and I love this little red line because this reminds us that it's not just a one-way thing, that there's a relative independence to some of this that influences the economic base, and that its whole purpose is to reproduce the economic base, but that in this dialectic of base and superstructure, the principal aspect of the contradiction is the economic base. Ultimately, all things stem from and can be understood on the basis of how they arise out of the economic base of society.
Yeah, the way we reproduce society is the way that we produce society.
Quote it. That's one we have to quote. Oh, I think I accidentally signed this out.
Oh, it's getting late and Carlos is screwing up. See, look at that.
So the last slide here, we finally made it to the end. The point of the communists, as we mentioned, is to keep both the internationalist and the long-term view of the working class in sight in every single struggle that it is engaged in. And what that looks like in terms of its long-term struggle is having to conquer political power, realizing that what it finds first immediately as an economic struggle is actually political in character, and has to rise into a struggle for the conquest of the state, for the destruction of the bourgeois state and the establishment of a working class state, which is labeled the dictatorship of the proletariat, which ultimately means that those who have the capacity to dictate, that those who have power are the proletariat, which represent the vast majority of society. When you look up the etymology of democracy, you see that it is composed of two Greek words, demos and kratos, common people, the common folk having the ability to rule, to exert power over whatever they decide to exert power over. The dictatorship of the proletariat, the state that in the long-term view communists hold that the working class will eventually establish, is nothing other than the realization of actual democracy. We've been taught to be scared of that word dictatorship simply because the dictatorships we've experienced have been those of capital, the dictatorship of the owners. When working people, when the masses of society are the ones who uphold their interests as a dictatorship, all that really means for the mass of society is that actual democracy has been realized. These contradictions. Go ahead, Noah.
No, all I was saying is something from Lenin, who says that liberals, they talk about democracy in general, this vague, abstract thing that they believe that their form represents the universal meaning of. A Marxist, however, never forgets to ask, democracy for which class? And that is what is important. Always, we cannot get around the fact that these two classes exist together yet cannot. We are in struggle until we, the proletariat, win. Period.
And this struggle isn't just this voluntary thing that we wake up one day and just do. It is produced by the very conditions that we exist under. It is the contradictions of capitalism itself that moves this forward, in the same way that if you have a boat on the beach, it will itself be moved forward by the waves. It is the waves of history that are moving the boat of humanity forward towards socialism, a destination we've been en route to for a very long time. The glorious return to the original condition, but in a higher stage. That's a stage where there will be public power, but it won't even look like power, because there's the conditions of power. The precondition for something like political power and politics is splitting the schism of society into various antagonistic classes. So communism as the state that we can realize after we abolish the capitalist mode of life in general in its totality, and the socialist state withers away, is a condition where, yes, you have institutions, but they're not of a political character, because the antagonisms that politics presupposes won't be there. So it's not this just we all spontaneously move around and do it. There are going to be institutions of public character, but those will not be political in the sense of antagonistic.
Yeah, this is one that when I'm explaining to coworkers or friends or family, that kind of throws them for a loop, right? Because the way we're taught to think of things, we can't understand that when we're speaking of this, we're speaking of continually changing and developing conditions. So what they do is impose it on how things are in our mode of life right now. But that isn't the case. And they kind of go like, withering away of government, that doesn't even make sense. How would that even be possible? Right? And so I go, whoa, hold on. Or they'll say like, what, we're not going to be American anymore or whatever, you know? And I tell them what Carlos just said. I said, really what's withering away is the political necessity of the state, right? That there's no need for everything to be politicized anymore because there's no longer this objective contradiction between sections of people based on how we produce society, how society is reproduced, how we produce the things that make us society. And so it just becomes us administrating things, right? Our water department, our fire department, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said, and this is something that I know Roland Bohr has been working on in his recent research into socialist construction, and the abolition of the political character of public institutions. But we've been ongoing for almost 4 hours now. We had a two and a half hour discussion of the interview that Tucker Carlson did with Omali Yeshitela and all the topics related to that. And now we've been speaking for an hour plus about the second chapter of the manifesto. If you haven't already, make sure to see our conversation on the first chapter a few live streams ago, specifically last Saturday. Yeah, anything you'd like to say, Noah, before we head out?
Thank you all for everybody who is here with us tonight. I want to say before we go, don't forget that Google has decided that we are no longer allowed to be monetized on YouTube. They have not given us a real reason why. And so if you'd like to help support the Institute, and if you can't, by the way, if you ain't got it like that, we don't want your money, okay? But if you can and you want to, it does put every dime into our budget. The reason I have this microphone that you can actually hear me on now is because of you guys. So if you have it and you want to, find us on patreon.com/MidwesternMarks, or go to the PayPal link that Carlos will be posting in the chat and will be posted in the comments afterwards. Other than that, it's been a great night. Thank you all for sticking around with us, and we'll see you next time. We're going to go out the same way we always do, though, unless you got something to add, Carlos.
Yes, I actually do this time around. Besides being able to support us through donations, which I have linked, you can also support us by purchasing our books, and that way you're not just donating, but you're also donating for your own education. And the last book we published was a special collection for Easter, titled Early Christianity and Marxism. It's a collection of texts from Engels, Lenin, and specifically the bulk of them from Thomas Riggins, of course, the counseling director of the Institute, someone who's been a philosophy professor for 60 plus years, a member of the Communist movement for 60 plus years, and has taught at the most prestigious universities in the country, universities like NYU and New School. So if you want to learn what the seasoned veteran of the communist movement and astute intellectual has to say about Marxism, Christianity, and also what Engels and Lenin have said in other essays, please do consider purchasing this book for, as we always do, Midwestern Marx prices. So $15 for a paperback, $5 for an ebook. The prices of the Academy that charge you $120 for a paperback and $80 for an ebook are not the ones we give out, even though the knowledge that we disseminate and we help people to get educated with is a million times more relevant to their everyday struggles than the stuff that they get in most academic books that are really just often just academics speaking to each other. So if you are interested in this, you can purchase yourself a copy at midwesternmarks.com/books. And as always,
If you've appreciated the work that we do, if you've appreciated the last 4 hours of education we have provided, please do consider leaving us a donation for our work. You can find the link to the donation pinned at the top of the YouTube chat, or if you're watching us on Twitter, which I think is what most of the 1,200 people watching us are on, you can donate to us in the comments to the Twitter live stream. The link is there. So if you have the means to support us, please do. But without further ado, thank you so much for sticking around in this historically long live stream. And we'll see you next time, or go out as we've been going out the last few days with our new and improved Americanized international outro video. We'll see you on next time.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In a world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations. We've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the fields. We stand unbowed before their armor, we defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International